Seeing as it's 6:31 and we have a quorum, I'll go ahead and call this special session of the Bloomington Common Council on April 30th to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Flaherty?
Here.
Ruff? Here. Rallo?
Here.
Piedmont Smith? Here. Stossberg?
Here.
Daly?
Here.
Zulik?
Here.
And Asari?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Going to start out the meeting with the interesting justice-related thing today. You may or may not be able to see, depending on where we're wearing it. Several members of council and staff are wearing denim today, so I'm going to pass it over to Clerk Bolden to tell us a little bit about Denim Day.
Good evening, and thank you. In 1992, an 18-year-old girl went out for her first driving lesson, and her 45-year-old instructor drove her out to a remote location and sexually assaulted her. In the aftermath of that case, when he appealed his conviction, it was overturned by the higher court, who made the argument that because she was wearing tight jeans, the sex had to be consensual. The women in the Italian parliament were outraged, and they began to wear jeans in protest. That protest spread to the United States, and Denim Day was established in 1999. Unless people think that it's something that only happened because of Italy, I'd like to make sure that everybody knows that in the United States, 1 in 5 women have been sexually assaulted. That number is highly likely to be worse if you consider how much sexual assault is underreported. And it's also significantly worse for Black women. In Bloomington, here in Monroe County, since August, there have been 50 sexual assaults reported on IU's campus. Less than 4% of sexual assaults in this country end in convictions. And again, just bringing it back to Bloomington, because this is where we are, we once had a judge issue a lighter sentence because they were concerned about ruining that young man's life. We can all do better. And so, in support of victims of sexual assault, on Denim Day, we wear denim. So I thank the City Council, because for those of you who are watching at home, you may not be able to tell, but every single City Council member is wearing denim on this day. So thank you to all of you.
Thank you, Clerk Bolden, for sharing some of those facts and information about this day. And thank you to council members for all managing to get our denim on. Moving on with the business of this evening with our agenda summation, we basically have one thing on our agenda today, which is try to get our budget priorities into a more concrete place in preparation for discussions with the administration. So we're going to have a presentation of some compiled information and summary from the Special Fiscal Committee, discussion amongst council members, public comment around budget priorities and the discussion this evening, and then any final comments, and if we're ready at that time to vote on a priorities list or a priorities letter, then we'll do so at that time. Any notes about council schedule, and then we'll adjourn. So we're going to start out that presentation tonight actually with the City Controller, who has some, just wants to give us a little bit of information about Senate Bill 1, SB 1 that passed, because that does change property tax revenue for Bloomington. And since a great majority of our budget comes from property tax revenue, it's really pertinent to have that be a consideration, I think, when we think about our priorities for next year. So if Controller McClellan would like to take the mic, that would be great.
Good evening, Council. Controller McClellan. I'm here tonight to give you kind of a summary update about how the changes to tax law and SB 1 will affect the 2026 budget year. SB 1 included a lot of deductions that property taxpayers will see as reductions to their tax bill, and credits additionally applied after the deductions that are further reductions to their tax bill. There are reductions for 1% homeowners, the 2% circuit breaker, which are rental properties and long-term care facilities, and deductions to ag land, agricultural land that will affect the county. So whenever you do something with property tax, it really takes a parcel-by-parcel analysis to really get the full impacts, and that is underway. We are doing that, and we should have that before budget season actually starts. But our preliminary estimates from the financial analyst are that the property tax changes will reduce our assessed value by about 1.5 billion. Our assessed value is 5.5 billion. So if our assessed value goes down by 1.5 billion, property tax rates will go up. So we will get that total impact of the deductions and the credits to you as soon as we can. Other big changes in SB1 are to lit revenues. Lit revenue structure will change in 2027 for year 2028. So lit revenues will stay the same for 2026. In 2027, the council will have to take action on a new lit rate just for you municipalities. The municipal lit rate cap is 1.2%. The rate is based on the city municipal adjusted gross income or taxable income. Previous lit rates were based on the total county adjusted gross income, and then that total amount was distributed to the units by either property tax levy or population based on the type of lit. So now what I'm saying is we will get a 1.2% rate on just our own cities, just the city, within the city municipality district, that adjusted gross income. We don't know what that is. Nobody knows what that is. We don't know how they're going to calculate it. Either a state budget agency or a DLGF is responsible, both of them together. Somehow they're responsible for doing that for all the municipalities in Indiana. So we will find out more. More information is needed. What we are predicting is that in 2028, what we're predicting is that the adjusted gross income of the city is not as much as the whole county, obviously, but that we won't be able to raise as much lit revenue as we normally receive. We won't be able to raise that same amount with the rate of 1.2%. And so we are anticipating that we'll see a decrease in lit revenues as well. So another thing about the lit revenues is all the buckets go away. There is no ED lit, there is no public safety lit, there is no PSAP lit for the dispatch center. It's not called certified shares. It's just city municipal lit. So more information needed on that as well, but that we have until 2027, and we're going to come back to you and ask you to pass a lit rate. The other thing, okay, that's lit. The other thing that SB1 did was it changed the rules for how we can bond, how we can get our general obligation bonds, our GO bonds, which are property tax bonds. So I'm just going to read this to you. All new general obligation bonds issued after May 1st, 2025 for short-term debt that is less than 5 years are subject to a 1-year cool-off period. Any 2-year or less GO bonds already outstanding are retroactively subject to the 1-year cool-off period. So our 2024 GO bonds are subject to the 1-year cool-off period. There is a lot of other language around these bonds that needs to be studied and digested about how these bonds get passed and what the different restrictions are. So takeaways are property tax revenue is going to go down immediately. Lit revenue is going to go down by 2028, and our ability to bond is severely reduced, not just for us Schools and libraries rely heavily on bonds, and they may have to take years off where they're not, I mean, they have to take years off where they're not allowed to use bonds in short-term bonds in that way. So I don't have a lot of information for you. I know that there are a lot of questions. I will try to answer any questions that you have.
Does anybody have any questions for Controller McClellan at this point? Councilmember Rallo?
Councilmember Daley should probably go first, because I had the opportunity during our fiscal committee today, so I can wait.
Oh, thank you. Mine's just really super quick. Can you please define what a cool-down period is for the bonds?
The cool down, that's a great question. The cool down period, the cool off period is you cannot pass any property tax bonds, short-term property tax bonds during that 1-year period.
Thank you for the definition. Thank you, Councilmember Rallo.
Are there other questions before we go to Dave? Go ahead, Councilmember Rallo.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about this earlier today, and so the lit cap rate, you said, for just the city is 1.2%. We don't know what that's going to yield in terms of revenue yet.
Correct.
Right? And currently we have a 2.1% lit, but that's countywide, and then it's essentially allocated, as you said, to the various, municipal
Units.
units.
Yeah.
Units is what based on population, right? Yeah.
Property tax levy.
Okay, so so that amount is known, but we don't know the other. So we will just have to see. But your assessment is that there's going to be a shortfall.
Yes.
And so I said at 2 o'clock this afternoon that maybe we should be preparing for austerity, thinking about essential maintenance and operations, and looking at discretionary spending as being something that obviously is going to be cut. You're going to be doing that obviously as well. So when this becomes clearer, we'll essentially be talking about this, collaborating, and determining how we'll proceed. But I guess what was also discussed today was that this has a bearing on what our priorities are, and those may have to essentially be on hold for a while. It seems to me. I don't know, depending upon maybe where they fall within necessities, I suppose. So am I more or less on target with that?
More or less, I think that you should still have priorities. We'll just have to adjust the funding that those priorities receive. They're still very valid and important to priorities.
More diplomatic than I am. So thank you so much.
Are there other questions for Controller McClellan? Okay, thank you. I don't know if you're planning to stick around through the rest of the discussion or not, if anything comes up, or if we should just reach you at another meeting.
I would appreciate it if I could leave and you could just take note of your questions and let me know. I'd be happy to stay, but I think you may be able to just compile the questions and send them to me.
I think that that's fine, as long as everybody else thinks that that's fine as
Great,
well.
thank
And of
you.
course,
I appreciate
at
it.
our next deliberation session on May 14th, that's a joint session between council and the administration about budget priorities. So you'll
I
of
will
course be at that one too.
Definitely be there. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
Thank you. All right, moving on. If our attorney would like to show that very short slideshow that I created earlier. So in our packet tonight, okay, let me back up a little bit. Back on April 9th, there was a deliberation session. I'm partly showing this for the public because hoped-for packet addendum is not quite published yet. But so at the April 9th deliberation session, we had initial ideas discussed and budget priorities for 2026. And in the packet for tonight's meeting, you can find those ideas. categorized under the broad outcome areas that we discussed on that evening. And last week, I had all council members take a survey and rate each of those ideas on a 1 to 5 star scale. So in bold are those survey instructions. And the example that I gave, I did not want people, and I discovered at the fiscal committee meeting that people didn't necessarily read these instructions, so it's good that I put them up again to make sure that any interpretations are actually accurate, but that I didn't want things rated in comparison to each other, but simply how much the project is valued for 2026 specifically. So rating something five stars if you valued it a lot and felt like it needed to be done urgently, and lower than 5 if it was less urgent, down to 1 if you didn't think that it should necessarily be prioritized at all. Next slide, please. And so the full results of that are going to be published, and I did email those out to council members earlier today, so you should have that in your email so that you can reference those full results. But then I averaged those scores. So the highest that any one idea could get would be a 5, and the lowest would be a 1. Councilmember Piedmont Smith and I then, and thank you, Councilmember Piedmont Smith, for creating this chart, which this page has labeled 4 and above. So incorporating government transparency throughout all operations, got the highest average score, followed by maintaining government infrastructure, increasing food security, investing in non-policing community response team, continuing successful hand support programs, partnering with the county on strategic use of opioid settlement funds, continuing and expanding Centerstone partnership, incorporating equity as a value through all operations. And so those were kind of the highest averages that we got. Next slide, please. And then we also listed out things that got above 3, and all of those couldn't fit on the same slide. So I have 3.44 to 4 up here on this one. I'm not sure if you want me to read all of those out or if you can get kind of an idea of the process Councilmember Piedmont Smith and I took on this. I'll just give everybody a minute to look at those. Next slide, please. And then this one is between 3 and 3.33 in terms of things that were maybe still relatively high averaged, but not as high. And then what we did, so Attorney Lehner, you can probably stop this screen share, is so last year we had a letter written to the administration with our priorities, and so we used that as a base, and we started a new letter with this year's priorities, so Councilmember Piedmont Smith is going to share that. So we took the priorities essentially that were 3.5 and above and incorporated them into a letter. So I thought that basically we could start off this evening. And so council members, once again, like you have all of those budget priorities ranked in your email. And I think everybody has their computer with them today, so then you can access that. So you can reference that while we're having our discussion, and you also have the full survey results, so you can also reference that while we're having our discussion. But we're just kind of going to go line by line through this letter once it gets up on the screen, which you also should have in your email. And we're working on our technology here. There we go. So if we can zoom in on that or make it full screen, Councilmember Piedmont Smith, that would be great. And so the letter is kind of two parts. So it's this language in the beginning, just kind of describing the concept in the context of SB1 and decreasing funding from federal agencies. We're recognizing the challenges ahead, preparing the 2026 budget, living in a time where we need to tighten our already tight belts, and in which price increases and economic uncertainty increase the vulnerability of our constituents. At the same time, we continue our effort to frame our funding priorities in the context of overall goals for the community, which have been heavily vetted and communicated via our long-range planning documents. Council members have agreed on a number of general objectives listed below. We also list a number of recommended investments to attain objectives in each outcome area. Clearly, your administration is already working towards several of these objectives, and in those cases, this memo serves as our encouragement to continue that work. We also recognize that there may be multiple ways to meet an objective, and we encourage collaborative deliberation on what actions or approaches other than those listed here might more effectively achieve the stated objectives. We recognize that several recommendations below will take more than 1 year to implement, and indeed, given funding uncertainties, we will need to carefully plan ahead and perhaps stretch our goals out over more years than previously predicted. We relay these ideas to you to facilitate collaboration and help achieve alignment on your budget proposal when you bring it forward in the coming months. We look forward to our discussion with you on May 14th and subsequent conversations prior to finalization of your proposal in August. So in terms of introductory paragraphs, because our overall goal is to be able to send this to the administration from all of us. Hopefully we have some kind of agreement. So I guess before we get into the actual priorities, does anybody have any concerns with the language already shared? Anything that they want to see added or don't feel is appropriate to include? Nice job, Councilmember Piedmont Smith. Thank you. I edited in only minor ways. All right, moving on then. So there was not necessarily a specific order, I don't think, in how these outcome areas are ordered on this note. Though I do believe if we look, it probably did start at the 4.0 and go down to some degree, at least in terms of outcome area. So our first outcome area, government transparency, our objective to incorporate transparency throughout all government operations. And so just to bring it back around to the survey, the text in blue reflects things that had an average rating of 4 or above, and then red, which we'll get to, is between 3.5 and 4, or 3.5 and 3.99. And then even though we categorized the things that were over 3, we didn't actually include them in this letter. And this is one of these moments where, if you strongly feel like you want something included, then this is the time to be like, hey, I want to include this, and then we can have a whole debate about it. Won't that be fun? Okay. And then also a time to potentially, like in this one, go, okay, if we want to incorporate transparency throughout all government operations as an objective, are there specific investments that we want to see made? And so Councilmember Piedmont Smith is sharing her screen partly because she's going to be able to edit this document in real time as people share ideas and comments. So ideas and comments about government transparency. And that includes people who might just fully disagree with having that on the letter at all. Anybody have any specific investment ideas about transparency that they want to see made by the city or encourage to continue doing if we know the city is doing something in this area? Councilmember Zulik.
Thank you. I have noticed, and I have had many constituent feedback input about how difficult it is to find information. And so honestly, just contributing some money to be able to find very quickly the services that are available at the government, because we have all these amazing programs and they don't mean anything if nobody knows about them.
Are there specific programs or like initiatives? Like, do you have any thoughts on how to actually do that? Or do your constituents, like, have they given feedback on what needs to be changed or improved to make that happen?
Yes, one thing specifically is I've had some people talk to me about how difficult it is to find the qualifications for workforce housing, which might be a direct factor in us being asked to waive those requirements. And so it would be very simple, I think, to have a website on housing and all the different resources that we have for housing and honestly, just resources that the city has, and in a very searchable, is it called CSV? Yeah. Thank you. That's what I got.
So should that go under a broader category of like website improvements or?
Yes. While we're talking about website improvements, I'll say the city council website needs more things than just packet and agenda. As document labels. Yeah.
It's document labels, okay. And maybe what I heard was consolidate assistance program information? Can we put that in there? Consolidate assistance program information? Maybe consolidate other information too, I don't know. But the specific concern stated was assistance program information, so.
Yes.
All right, other thoughts on, and I also want to say, like, these investments, like, they don't have to necessarily, I mean, I think that the city already knows that the website could be improved, and there's some element of work being done on that. So it doesn't have to be, these don't have to be like new and innovative things. These can be things that are already happening, because one of the sentences above does say, like, if they're already happening, this is encouragement and support for them to continue happening. And for investments, even, whether it's financial investment or staff time investment. So, other ideas, Councilmember, sorry.
Handful of things, and not in any particular order, but related to this. The first, we made this transition from, I forget the vendor, to Socrata platform for data, for the open data portal. That's been somewhat inconsistently managed, and I think we actually need more data capacity. So either dedicating existing staff within IT to sort of data, or hiring someone in that field might go a long way. The question about website, yes?
Is that what you're talking about?
Just generally all of our open data. So we have a data platform where we put all of our all of the data that's intended for people to get access to. A lot of the time it is currently, it's better than it was, but still like somewhat unstructured, hard to find the information that you're looking for.
Okay,
So,
does that sentence that Councilmember Piedmont Smith just added?
you can make it a bit bigger, sorry. Increase data capacity and improve data platform. Sure, yeah, that does capture it, yes.
Okay, all right, what was your second thing?
Adding to what Councilmember Zulik said, I think that something around user experience research around the use of the website would go, I think, a long way. And then, and maybe just as a sub point to that, but yeah. Two other things. This maybe with more of an outcomes, maybe towards things like objectives. I think that we need a clear set of accountable, metrics for things like FOIA requests, like how quickly we get back to people when they request information, with clear, establishing some clear benchmarks and publishing those. I think that sort of goes with the transparency thing. And then maybe something that's relevant to council specifically. I would really like, I think, to Councilmember Zulik's point, like I would really like council to have our own web presence.
Like social media web presence?
All the web presences, we should, as a separate branch of government, have something significant in. But that would be some type of probably both a capital investment, but also a personnel investment, perhaps.
Right.
But
Okay, great. Do those edits and changes that Councilmember Piedmont Smith just added encompass all of your comments?
you might
related
put
to
some
that?
uncertainty around it. Like I do think we should like saying create independent web and social media, maybe like exploring what that would look like, because yeah. Other than that, it's all
Okay.
good.
Great. Other thoughts? Councilmember Piedmont Smith?
Well, I just have a question. The investments that I just typed into the document came from individual council members and were not part of the survey, so I don't know that they have the same standing as things that were already in the document.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think that that so far they're underneath this objective. Their specific investments that might be underneath this objective of incorporating transparency. But you're right. So I think that the other piece of comment that we're looking for is whether or not there's objection, no matter the strength, in anything that gets added down there, and that needs to be notated somehow. So people should feel free to
And it might be
comment on that as well.
It might be worth, maybe signaling like how you've done with colors or something, things that are continuing to evolve, because these won't have scores, right? If it's going to be accompanied with some, type of score. Maybe there's a separate place where you're like, here's some other ideas, the low-scoring things and other things that were sort of mentioned. But
Like a separate letter?
no,
or
maybe
a
just an
separate part of
appendix
the
or
letter?
something, right? Like
Okay.
where you maybe at the end of the letter you attach all of the, because we've said in the letter we're including the ones that received a score of X, but you may just at the end include that whole table with here's all of the things that were mentioned and how they were ranked.
Yeah, I mean, I think that right now the letter says we're including the things, but
Yeah.
this is a draft. I'm going to say this again. This is a draft, and I think honestly it would be pretty amazing if we managed to make this draft a final enough copy that everybody felt good about voting on anything tonight, and that our objective, maybe that should be our objective, or maybe it shouldn't. So, are there, Councilmember? Sorry.
I might say that, I think, perhaps a good goal, and we did mention this briefly at the committee meeting, but, the way that I'm viewing this document is we want to send something that nobody has any objections to the things being, maybe not nobody, but the vast majority just don't have any objections to a thing being listed there. Again, like the fact that this year we're having lots of good conversations early on, and then we're going to have an engaged conversation, and then have many of them because we're starting a bit earlier with the Office of the Mayor. I think this is, to me, it's the beginning of structuring that conversation, rather than sort of our final, our final input.
It certainly is the beginning. Other thoughts about government transparency or potential investments related to government transparency? Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
We have several sources of information for the public that are not under bloomington.in.gov. And actually, we have a website called Help Bloomington Monroe, which was done along with Monroe County, that has all of the assistance programs. I don't know if it's been kept updated, but it's a really good site to send people who are looking for assistance. But again, I don't know if you do a site on bloomington.in.gov, if it'll get you those other sites on other domains that are related to the city but not directly on our domain. So I think that creates some confusion when people are looking for information. I don't know. I'm kind of just agreeing with what has been said.
Other comments, suggestions, concerns with anything that's on there right now under government transparency? It's really important to stay hydrated. All right. Let's go ahead and when Councilmember Piedmont Smith finishes her typing, move on down to our next outcome area, which is high-performing government. And so the one of the higher rating ones was maintain government infrastructure. And I think that the phrasing of that in the original slide, which is actually in our packet, I'm trying to find it, was maintain government infrastructure and facilities, including maintenance of streets, buildings, properties, sewer, water infrastructure, et cetera, basically all the things. But there were not actually specific investment areas. And I'm not sure. And then there was another related suggestion somewhere, which was doubling road paving or road repaving. I think actually that ended up under transportation, but it, I think, was lower than the 3.5 cutoff. It was the double budget for repaving and repair of roads. So that's something that didn't quite make the cut in terms of average numbers, but would potentially be a subcategory under maintaining government infrastructure that did make that cut. And I'm throwing that out there as a conversation point. And then the other category of things that was between the 3.5 and 4 was related to the functionality and work capacity of City Council and City Council office, and had two specific investment things, which was investing $200,000 in council office operations, and then hiring additional council staff, which this is our first maybe example of some amount of repetition. And so for the sake of the public who might be in the room or listening, in the survey, I did not consolidate anything that was repetitive. I went, okay, these things are similar, but they're not exactly the same, and I'm going to put both of them up there. So there are lots of changes or improvements that could probably be made related to how these investments and objectives are presented in this letter. So suggestions, concerns, etc. Who would like a moment? Councilmember Rosenberger.
Hi, I'm new here, but I wanted to chime in. I think this is an important area. Is it okay? Is this just kind of is casual, kind of free flowing?
Yeah, we can say it's casual, free flowing. The part that you missed was the intro of saying we did that survey. Mm-hmm. Here are the 3.5 or 3 and up averages. I emailed those out today. You should have them in your email, so then you can have that. And then Councilmember Piedmont Smith and I consolidated the 3.5s and up into this letter. And so now we're commenting, refining, et cetera.
Thank you. Sorry for my tardiness. I think this one is great. I don't remember how I ranked it, but definitely this year, I think the council is so behind in bringing legislation, writing legislation, doing some responding to constituents and things, because obviously we are down staff, but it's hard to keep up, I think, with 9 active council members. Or this is a pretty active council, I think, compared to other terms potentially. Mostly, I'm just saying, I support this, and I think some of what Isak, are we saying first names today or no? Councilmember Asari was talking about with kind of exploring a communications branch of a city council staff, I think, is very interesting and something some of us have talked about for years. Or I think when I came on board in 2020, it was discussed that we don't have any way to get our word out, press releases, narratives, right? Like our meetings and everything like that. So, and I think kind of like the National Parks Instagram, it's really informative and fun. And I think we could have staff that does that too. Is that okay? And I mean,
Yes,
part of,
do you have any specific, like, ways that you think that
it's spent like
this
investing
should
in
be
that
changed or
200,000
modified or
kind of thing?
added to in terms of the high-performing government category?
Tell me if this is one. We like, you mean like in the bullet point, the red ones?
Or, yeah.
Investments and so an investment to me that's different is pay our staff competitive salaries. I think when we can't compete with other governments in town, even city hall attorneys, right? Like our attorneys are paid less than all attorneys in this building. I think that's problematic. And I mean, we did the salary study, and after that, 2 of our staff left. So I guess that would be a bullet point, an action item for me.
Okay, so specifically, yeah. So there was an increased pay for council staff specifically, and I think that it was just under 3.5. It was 3.44. And then, yeah, so, okay, I'm looking at the other chart right now, which I showed earlier. So the $200,000 council office investment scored the 3.89. And the additional council staff scored a 3.56, which is why those 2 things are up there in red. Increasing salaries for council staff scored 3.44. And then increasing council budget for external consultants scored 3.33. And this is one of these moments, and I think that our council attorney has submitted a draft budget which includes a slight, she presented it at the fiscal committee meeting a couple meetings ago, and I think that it included a slight increase of more like $50,000 to $60,000, and included that's not including salaries, but it included outside consultants and some other additions like that. So I think that it's certainly, I mean, all of those council office investments got some element of support. The $200,000 in general council office operations encompasses all of them. So I don't know how specific we want to be. Councilmember, sorry.
A couple of these things, one thought is that some of the things that we were talking about with website maybe fit better under high-performing government more so than transparency. The second is something, again, that is on our list somewhere, but we need to mention permitting here. Some, I would think, particularly like sort of a unified and clear permitting process, again, with sort of clear benchmarks, et cetera. There's some...
The permitting process changes got a 3.44, and I think that those were under transportation.
Yeah, right. So I mean, it might work, I don't know, where one thinks it goes. So throwing that out for maybe a discussion point. There's some element of, which we've talked about as relates to the continued transition into open outcome-based budgeting is that, you know, the better that we're able to get data, collect data, report on data. And so I'm particularly thinking about asset management and sort of some proactive way of us knowing this is the idea that I think it came up around keeping an active list on the state of sidewalks as an example. So integrating that at scale, I think, is something that's at least worth exploring. You're looking at me confused.
I didn't follow that, yeah.
Which, from the beginning, or which are you not following?
I don't know.
The permitting thing, or the
No,
thing
and
about data?
Permitting was under housing, not under transportation.
But
I
there's
think
also like
the part
business,
about
there's also
data,
like business
it's-
permitting, right? There's also business permitting, is
Yeah.
that under housing? But I mean,
Well, I think when the suggestion was originally made, like that particular assessment of the 3.44 was under housing, because I think that it was related to, because you suggested the permitting thing. That was one of yours at that meeting a couple weeks ago. And I don't know where we want to put it. But I think at the time it was specifically referenced with developer
with building and
permits.
housing, yeah.
Yeah. But
The-
yeah, it was the data
Well, so
thing, I
the
think,
the
that I-
data thing is about, so we've talked about, and I know the controllers talked about getting new software, for example, to be able to track outcomes with expenditure. You might think similarly about being able to track the state, for example, of different things that the city owns. So like, the buses. But similarly, we might think about what it might look like to be able to track, for example, sidewalks. And I'm using that example because you've brought this sort of GIS-based model of looking at where you make investments in sidewalks. So thinking that same type of approach for how we do capital investments across the city is something that would help us be a more high-performing government. Just throwing it out for
I'm just
thought.
wondering how we want to put that on
Oh,
there.
I don't know.
Because, I mean, your sidewalk example is like, what do you mean by track sidewalks? Like, are you using that as an example because it's something we already do, or using that as an example because you
Using it
think
as an example because it's something we've already talked about, but I don't, and I think that's been illustrated as a possible way for us to approach how we make our investments strategically in sidewalks. So rather using that as an illustration of the type of things that we might think about in broad sense. Let me stop talking, and I'll think of a better way of saying it, and I'll chime back in a second.
Okay,
as to
well,
not
Councilmember
dominate
Piedmont
the-
just added improved tracking of asset management.
Yeah.
Is that basically?
Yeah.
Okay.
That works.
Because I think that kind of, I mean, I know that there's a great like a dashboard about our streets and their conditions in terms of paving and like the paving schedule. And to some degree, we have a map about sidewalks like that. But but you're also saying things like buildings and
Potentially, yeah.
other,
yeah.
like, I mean, you
Yeah.
mentioned buses, so like other pieces of.
Right.
How would that, how would that kind of investment, which would be potentially an investment in software and a potential investment in like staff time to inventory all that, how would that be beneficial?
It helps us be proactive about maintenance of infrastructure, assets, et cetera, which
Okay,
tends to save money in the long run,
so it helps with deferred maintenance sort of issues?
for example, yeah.
Other thoughts, how we could clean this up or add to it? Councilmember
add-
Piedmont Smith, yes.
This is a totally tangential thing, but I'm looking at the screen and the closed captioning is blinking on and off. It's a minor thing, but I'm wondering if there's an easy way to fix that since we have an IT professional in the house. If not, don't worry about it, but that's my only thing.
We've been discreetly working on this.
Okay, thank you. Ineffectively, I might add.
Thank you. Other comments related to high-performing government, maintaining government infrastructure? So like your suggestion, Isak, really speaks to the maintaining government infrastructure piece of those two. Okay, great. Yeah. Councilmember Rallo.
Yeah, I was the one who suggested doubling the street paving, and although it received a low score, I think that it is clearly within the maintained government infrastructure objective. I would be very pleased to see at least some increase in budget and some clear objectives about, I mean, we should be, I don't know if we do, have a survey of streets in terms of their viability, or I don't know what you would call a street, in terms of its ability to provide service, and we should have that information, and I think there should be a clear plan of addressing those that need it with some number attached. That would give us some clear, but anyway, just generally speaking, I would say put streets under maintained government infrastructure as one of the major priorities, because I think the need is obvious. And of course, we have other infrastructure, stormwater and water piping and things like that, but, and that's important too. But in any case, if we're concerned about transportation, of course, multimodal transportation relies on good streets. Bicycles depend on it too. So maybe, I don't know, well, you've included, yeah, great. I'm good with that bullet.
Councilmember Piedmont-Smith.
Yes, I feel very strongly we need to be more consistent and precise about how to improve functionality and work capacity of City Council. So, like you reviewed, Councilmember Stossberg, in addition to the 2 points in red here under investments, there were a couple of other things that were in the list, you know, as far as raising pay. Well, we've added that. And I don't remember what the other.
External consultants.
Increasing the budget for external consultants. Can we consolidate this into one point? And I think I would like to be guided by Attorney Lehner, who has crunched the numbers, and let's just say exactly what we feel we need. I mean, I would say, you know, I would be willing to trust her expertise, and since I am on the fiscal committee, you know, we kind of talked about what she submitted as the preliminary budget. I would like to have a solid proposal for our own office that we can all get behind and have it be a clear request. To me, this is make it or break it in this budget.
Is this a moment where you would like Attorney Lehner to talk at all about what kind of dollar amount investment she sees as being valuable?
Yes, I think that would be helpful. And I know that her preliminary budget did not include personnel, so
Right.
it's a separate thing.
Yeah, so the Attorney Lehner, do you want to talk about the budget instructions that you received from the controller in terms of?
Sure. My instructions from the Office of the Controller were to simply address categories other than salaries and benefits. So the department budget that I presented to the fiscal committee and to some shared with council members also didn't include any changes with respect to salaries or staff. Instead, I did add some budget line items for training, support, and other categories in the hope of and the intention of increasing workflow, work capacity, and expertise. Last year we defended a lawsuit. There were times, and still are times this year, when I'm working 60 to 70 hours per week simply because of the workflow. A portion of that is attributed to the fact that the office hasn't been fully staffed as well. I can't discount that. But there are changes. At this time now, we don't have access to a public access counselor as a resource. So we are doing more in-house with respect to research. And I think that likely will continue. That's simply one example. But there are times when counsel's office needs additional expertise and capacity beyond our limits in a way that, for example, the legal department may have access to here within the city. I think there are resources that council members and council as a body could avail itself with respect to maybe consulting with Reedy Financial on particular issues, whether it's the budget or some other aspect. I think that there are additional resources that would be beneficial in terms of the performance of council as a body, as well as council staff. So if you go back and look at the particular additions in the department budget, all of those additions trace back to increasing, improving expertise or capacity in some form or another. I do want to point out also that the budget of council's office includes several line items, large expenditures that really are unrelated to council's performance or the support and training of office staff. Jack Hopkins is housed within council's budget, as well as a $55,000 line item for Buzzkirk Chumley. Sidewalk improvements are housed within council's office. So the department budget looks quite large. However, when you factor those elements out, the total expenditure for council's office truly is about $40,000 or less. So I wanted to raise awareness for that.
Thank you. So right now up on the board, there was a $200,000 number in terms of investing that in council operations. And I think in your sample budget that you sent out, looks like it's far less than that. I'm not doing the math in my head right now, maybe $70,000 increase. How much of an increase do you think would help those things? I mean, is it that 70,000? Like, I guess I'm questioning whether that 200,000 number is the best number.
I think it depends upon what that $200,000 is intended to cover. With respect to the document that I prepared, I wasn't contemplating increasing salaries or adding staff. Quite honestly, I've been here about 6 months. Within the last year, the staff, all 3 positions, have turned over. So the office hasn't been fully staffed since I've been here. I've not seen how it functions when all 3 positions are filled. My focus so far really has been with respect to office training, efficiency, support, targeted items that would make the office more effective and efficient.
Okay. I also want to say for the record, I'm not sure that I have experienced a fully staffed and trained council office either. There was a very short period of time where we had 3 staff members last year, but one of those staff members was still being trained at that time before we started turnover. So, I mean, there's 4 entirely new council members up here and 1 returning one. I mean, that's kind of something. Comments, further comments? Councilmember, sorry, you had your hand up earlier.
Yeah, I think what Attorney Lander was saying at the end there is really useful for us to continue to pull. And that thread is thinking about, what are the things that we actually want to see? So when we think about increased capacity, I think the increased capacity for what is like the question that we should answer. I think it's the right frame of thinking, right? It's thinking about are we trying to get legislation through quicker? Is it that we'll be able to handle more legislation? Is it that we're responding to correspondence better, faster? Like what, I think we have to be, and when we tie our discussion to that, I think it will help us come up with the right figure for what that looks like. I think we talked, as an example, Councilmember Zulik talked about, or maybe it was me, the 2 of us said about having an online presence as an example, and then Councilmember Rosenberger seconded that if that's a thing that we want to work towards, I think we can work backwards from there and sort of determine, what does that look like if that's the thing that we want to achieve. So just really just seconding, I think, particularly what Councilmember Piedmont Smith said, just in terms of us, focusing on being a bit more specific than just making it look like we just want some extra money to figure out what we'll do with it later, right? I mean.
Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Which council member suggested the $200,000, and maybe we could hear from that person as to what the intention for that money was?
I think that was Councilmember Flaherty.
It was the kind of things that our staff has added to the budget and additional staff. It was a ballpark, my best guess, across those categories.
Did that $200,000 include hiring additional staff, or just like the consultant stuff, the training stuff, all of those pieces?
I think potentially additional staff. I think all of this is subject to some exploration. I think that's one way to pursue it. I think having additional staff might alleviate the need for some consultants, depending on the expertise we might have in-house or not. Those may have a little interplay. But I think when I wrote that number, yes, I think the idea of hiring more staff was in my mind, as well as staff pay.
Okay. Councilmember Rosenberger.
Thank you. We put the 3.44 under 2 things. Can we put it under the other ones just to have those scores, like the repaving, I think, right, had a score a little lower. And I don't know if this is where it goes, but this year, for example, no one wanted to be president, and I think the bump in pay isn't worth it to most people because it's like extra meetings, right, for council president. I mean, is it 1 a week at least, and then it's herding cats or turtles for part of the week, you know what I mean? So I think if people aren't really up for stepping up to be a president of council, it's something to consider. Herding turtles, what? I'm sorry, I did hear it somewhere, and it's something I've said for years now. Feel free to...
Herd turtles.
herding turtles. Yeah, it's slower than cats.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it's quite hard.
Except you can
I'm
literally
sorry.
pick
It's
turtles
just-
up and put them in places, like,
Yeah,
you
I'm
can't
sorry.
do that.
Yes, but these, they still move and they flip and they turn around. You think it's easy, but it's not. I'm sorry, it's just
We're
a
off the
thing.
rails.
Yeah.
What was
But
your comment related to this exactly?
if looking at the pay for our council president and vice president goes here, it's not something we talked about, but it's an investment, I think. I don't know if it comes out of our budget. I think it does, right? Just that, I know I say this a lot, but I don't think it's even minimum wage for the extra hours that are worked. And it's a lot of extra work. So I think it's something to look into. That's it. And I don't know where it belongs.
I'm not sure where it belongs either. One of the pieces, though, up there is that $200,000 is very general, and then there are specific ideas underneath that, including the specific budget that our attorney has already submitted as an initial draft. So I think what I'm looking for here is final language. And I honestly, I don't feel like this is great final language in terms of, say, presenting this to the administration. I think that if we want to, I think first of all, we need to think about whether that $200,000 number is correct, is the best number, and then I think that things should be subcategorized under there in terms of these are the types of things that we want to see investment in, as opposed to having them be like specifically separate line items. And I'm not sure, like I wouldn't put hiring additional council staff on there for the 2026 year simply because we haven't been fully staffed yet. And so we need to look at, like, I feel like I need to know what that looks like before, say, prioritizing that for 2026. And so it's like that kind of stuff that, like, right now, I want to hear some of that discussion about how we should actually change this. Councilmember, sorry.
Maybe as a suggestion to move us along, maybe what you say here instead of saying invest $200,000 in council is something more like work with council staff to identify areas of investment, enhancement, et cetera, that will create better performing government for council. Because I think the point is, I mean, if we put ourselves in take off the hat of the fact that we're talking about council itself. When every department is coming to us this year, the idea is that every single line item in the budget is tied to a thing. And so if any other department came and just had a bulk thing and they're like, generally this will improve X, right? We'd say how. Tell us the exact services, the exact programs, what is this being spent on? So maybe we're not there yet. I think, we're going in, I think, the right direction with some ideas, but I think that, for the fact that this is a document to begin the ongoing negotiations and discussions and collaboration with the Office of the Mayor to come up with what the final budget looks like, I think it's fine just to give a broad statement of, we would like to see some enhancements on how council does business, and then maybe list some ideas, including personnel expenditures, website redesign, whatever.
And it's this kind of idea right now that is kind of why I'm like, there's no way that we can vote on a final copy of this tonight, right? Because I'm thinking about, okay, does anybody object to, this is a very important question right now, does anybody object to reformatting that investment area to say something like what Councilmember Asari just said, to invest in council office operations, including things like, and then leave it farther down the line in the specific budget proposals, but putting that general line in. So does anybody object to generalizing all of those things in that way? Councilmember Flaherty.
I think my concern is that my experience over, I guess, 5 budget cycles now is often that council will say, we would really like X. The administration comes back much later and says, well, we did that. And then council says, no, no, you didn't. And so the lack of specificity and alignment has been a systemic problem that could be reflective of a lot of things, including a lack of collaboration, in the budget proposal development and more. But I don't strongly object. I think some of the reasons why we might take a slightly different approach here are fine. I will say, in compiling priorities for when we shared councilmember priorities a bit ago, I tried to give ballpark. In some cases, I gave ranges. In some cases, I just gave a number that is, of course, an estimate. It wasn't a line item. It wasn't one grade 8 salary plus fringe is X. I wasn't taking that level of detail. But I was trying to actually give numbers, because that was kind of what was requested of the process, as I understood it anyway, and what I think is needed to some degree to be able to actually have that alignment with the administration. And so maybe that comes later in conversation. And that's fine too. I just want to voice that concern at minimum, that I don't think, at least for the things that I was personally submitting as priorities to the bucket of things we were considering, I don't think the costs are wildly out of scope. So I thought there was value in having some target or anchor of sorts, but I also get the criticism. So.
Would you be happy with a minimum target? Like invest a minimum of in council office operations? Or would that not address your concern?
I don't have strong feelings. Thank you.
Councilmember, sorry.
I agree with Councilmember Flaherty. I think that my position is more, though, that we need to decide how we want to use our time today, very specifically, because I think, yes, more specific, the better. But if we're going to leave it at for example, at 200K, I think that we do need to break it down at the level of, we'd like this, this, and this, and that we also need to hold ourselves accountable the same way that we're trying to move the whole city budget into saying, to achieve these specific outcomes. And so the reason why I'm suggesting what I'm suggesting at this stage only is just because I don't know if we're ready yet in our deliberations to peg these things to specific things that we want to see out of this specific amount of investment. So that's, but I mean, if we're all willing and if we're willing to have this conversation today, let's have that conversation today and be more specific, and do the same with many of these other things. But so I just wanted to second, though, that I think at some point we do need to get to the stage that Councilmember Flaherty just said so clearly. I also share his concern around, once we've communicated something, that, the ability to sort of not then address it wholly, and so that doesn't actually make us equal partners in here. And so I 100% agree with that.
Where does that leave us?
I think we should continue through the list. I mean, I don't think we're going to get a resolution tonight, but at least we could have a chance to talk about the things that are on the list.
Well, then I think that we're moving down to neighborhood livability and social health. Is that where we're moving? So increasing food security for our residents got high scores without specific implementation, but Councilmember Piedmont Smith discovered this line from last year's letter about developing grocery stores and/or other healthy food options in local food deserts, which I'm not sure quite got done, though maybe there are attempts being made to do that. And then this larger category of aiding low-income residents and agencies that support them in the face of federal and state budget cuts, which included direct grants and assistance, things in ESD in hand that already exist, and then also doubling Jack Hopkins' social service grant, and those got they were between 3.5 and 4 in terms of support. Comments about these items? No comments about these items? Councilmember Rosenberger?
I don't exactly know where the food deserts are, but because of our zoning code, a lot of areas don't allow grocery stores in the neighborhoods, but there is a goal in the comprehensive plan that says encourage the development of neighborhood hubs, so something like a bodega, little neighborhood restaurant or bar kind of thing. But we can't do, I mean, I'm just saying, but we can't do that right now because of the UDO. So that, I don't know if they're, I mean, it's free to change the UDO, but I don't know if, so it's just, I'm just saying it's really hard to develop grocery stores in like neighborhoods when it's disallowed, basically.
Okay. Councilmember Asari?
I don't know if this goes here or maybe it goes somewhere else, but we do have the goal of reducing food waste by 40%, I think, in the Climate Action Plan. And so I think as relates to food security particularly, I think there's a lot of, I'm trying to bring together lots of disparate thoughts because I know like our waste management agreement, for example, I think comes into play, composting, those type of things, but then also urban farming, local gardening programs, pilots around food security, like those type of things, giving everybody chickens. Those type of ideas all fit sort of to me within this categorization.
Okay. There were a couple of things related to composting. There was removing the general fund subsidy for sanitation to use to support composting, which got 3.44. I think that was under government. High-functioning government, maybe. And then there was Explore Pay-to-Throw Trash programs, which got 3.33, which is kind of similar. And then there was $100,000 for Community Composting Program, which got a 3.11. And I don't remember where the composting program was. Environmental, thank you. And the pay-as-you-throw was also under effective government. I'm not quite sure where it goes either. I'm just giving that information about other things. Councilmember Zulik, I think you had your hand up.
Thank you. Going off of Councilmember Rosenberger's comment about UDO revisions relating to specifically neighborhood livability and social health, there are quite a few things in the allowed use table that make it very hard to do just about anything in a neighborhood, including childcare. And in a state where we have a childcare crisis, like that, it's not acceptable that we have places where people are not allowed to take care of children. That's all.
I'll also go ahead and take some notes right now about, because we had several things about UDO-related overhauls. There was one line that was $200,000 to $400,000 to overhaul the UDO in line with city policy and form-based code that got 3.22. There was take steps now toward form-based code with an eventual UDO overhaul. I think that was take steps that are free now, and that also got a 3.22. So basically in the low threes, we're looking at the UDO and potentially making changes to that, and those, it doesn't necessarily cost very much to change the UDO except for a whole lot of staff time and a whole lot of council time and a whole lot of legislative process time. And then in the end, it takes a whole lot of enforcement potentially. And it relates to the permitting stuff. So there might be more ongoing costs with that. Other comments on these things? Councilmember Daley.
Yeah, I guess I'll just say that, a lot of what I was looking at when we were going through our priorities is just thinking about what's happening federally right now and just around the country, and also with, SB1. I think we're going to be facing, obviously, hardships in a lot of different areas, and especially with our social service organizations. I think our communities are going to be suffering and needing help in a lot of different ways, which is why I think, things like Jack Hopkins, social service grant funding, and any other way that we can put money into social service to help keep the more marginalized members of our community afloat. They're going to be the ones who are suffering maybe the most, and more people needing those services. So I just want to make a strong argument for looking in that direction. That includes that increased food security for residents and other forms of support.
I just want to speak to Jack Hopkins for a second, because I'm going to put myself out there as kind of in disagreement with doubling Jack Hopkins. I totally agree with that idea right now of needing to support our various, support our residents in various ways and support our nonprofits, which are going to be losing funding, and also support our residents with their necessities. But I'm not sure that doubling Jack Hopkins is the best way to do that. It's a kind of huge administrative burden in a lot of ways. We have a lot of different grant programs in the city, and I think that before we put more money into Jack Hopkins, we need to have a better way to administer it. And I also think that if we're going to put a whole lot more city and taxpayer money into supporting various nonprofits, I'm not sure that making those awards based on a council committee is the best way to make those awards, or if it would be better to have a different kind of outcome-based process in terms of giving more money to organizations that have achieved certain goals or are looking at more specific metrics. And I'm not sure that Jack Hopkins in its current, in the way that it currently is just like the best place for that money, because doubling it would mean $1 million. And that's, I think that's, I think if we're going to distribute that much money, then it needs to be distributed in a more metric-based, kind of data-based way than Jack Hopkins is right now. I think also, from what I understand about the origins of Jack Hopkins, it was really started to kind of be like seed money for new ideas and new things, and $1 million isn't seed money. $1 million, I think, needs to be put into tried and tested sort of programs that are definitely going to get the outcomes that we need. So I'm not sure that that's, if we're going to invest more in those categories, I think maybe it should be something different. So anyway, Councilmember Rallo.
I couldn't disagree more. I think my suggestion was to double it. I think that it provides money for very basic needs in the community: food, housing, substance abuse, and clearly we have a deficiency when it comes to the allocation compared to the requests. And there are some novel ideas that I'm serving on Jack Hopkins right now that I'm afraid I'm going to allocate nothing to, even though I think they're very creative and good ideas that have merit, because the needs of things like food and housing are priorities. Or the need for, say, one request is simply to allocate, have a reserve of money for people who are distressed because they can't pay bills and they need some kind of bridge funding to keep from having their utilities turned off. I don't know, I know there are other organizations that do this. However, I think that the need is there, and the objectives of those organizations have been fulfilled as far as I can see. And I think that they're worthy. So one reason I'm struggling with this, I think, is because when I approached this request in the budget, like Councilmember Flaherty, I had very specific requests. I had double this allocation, double that, and an FTE, whatever. So those were very specific. Now, when it comes to something like on the topic at hand, which is increasing food security for residents, I mean, we have a whole action plan, sustainability action plan of actions, partners, timeframes, goals, costs, and everything that could be a menu to be using. I don't know, for instance, if there is a community survey of the food system in the community. I haven't seen it. That was a goal that was supposed to happen in ESD, but I've never seen it produced. That would be a great start as a baseline, just to find out what the food system looks like and then how we can approach it. But in terms of practical things related to food security, add more garden space and parks. We have parkland that could be utilized. We have park staff that obviously upkeep parks. One of the goals could be simply to administer growing space for people to garden. Just an idea. So, Councilmember Asari and I have discussed this in the past and ways to address food security, but I think that Jack Hopkins is one means by which we can make sure that food is getting to the people in need. So, I think we agree on a lot, Councilmember Stussberg, but apparently we see differently about Jack Hopkins at this point.
Well, I guess my question back at that would be, in terms of thinking about, say, the Jack Hopkins stuff that we awarded last year, do we have any knowledge of any specific outcomes that we've gotten, like, that any of those organizations had? That's what I mean by an administrative burden.
They report and describe to us, and tell us how many people they have, have benefited and so forth. We just had interviews with them. I don't doubt that they fulfilled the need. Now, so you're talking about, do we have something on the level of like an audit or something to find out specifically where all the money goes? That might be a good idea.
Yeah, I guess that's what I mean. Like, if we're going to double it, then I think that we need to have a better administrative system in place for managing all of that money and getting all of that follow-up, and I'm not sure that that's possible next year. So I don't necessarily object to, like, spending more money on that category of thing, just maybe not in Jack Hopkins, maybe in other ways, through expansion of other, like some of the other hand programs, that because it's more built into hand in terms of the system, as opposed to, like, we don't have that follow-up built into the council office.
True. Councilmember Asari, do you have anything to add? You're the chair of the committee, so.
Well, I think that the point is well taken, that if we want to set clear targets and goals and outcomes associated with Jack Hopkins spend, that there's going to be a lot of administrative capacity needed to track all of that. I think we've taken steps towards this with that in mind, and trying to put together a rubric, for example, this year. And I think, I think that needs to be strengthened to be more clearly tied to outcomes that we want to see. But I agree with Councilmember Rallo that, at the end of the day, A lot of these organizations are very lean. They're dealing directly with the type of populations that we've been concerned around, like with increases in lit and those type of things, that low-income, emergency need-facing populations and so on. And it's a variety of services, I think, that would often be outside of the scope of our city budget sometimes. There's sort of things that we often forget, if you will. And so I really am very supportive of us increasing Jack Hopkins funds. But then, I mean, I think I also agree with you. I mean, we do need to tie that to clear outcomes. Because I think at the moment, if we increase it, we'll just get people applying for basically the same things with a little bit more. And I think that we could do, go a long way. And we're seeing that this year. I think, our top ask was for like $190,000 this year from an organization, just because the pot got bigger, so people are asking for a lot more. And that's great. I think that that's a welcome development, but I do think that we would want to tie that closer to the specific outcomes we're trying to work towards. So perhaps that goes hand in hand, that you say increase Jack Hopkins funding and put some, capacity around tracking it.
Could I add one other thought?
Yeah.
And that is that listening to several people talk about, I mean, right now we're in a period of uncertainty with state and federal government. The economy may be at a point of real volatility, and it's likely, the people who are most disadvantaged in society are going to bear the brunt. And Councilmember Daley talked about that. We're likely to get cuts in things like the hand budget, CDBG block grants. We're likely to get cut in transit funding and so forth. We might have an opportunity of actually developing a program of local food, because this is a priority of the director of HHS, Robert Kennedy, F. Kennedy Jr., is local food, making local healthy food a priority. So there may be opportunities for matching funds for that. So it may be a good idea to have the local food or food security as a goal that we might be putting some money into, that we might be able to get grants from HHS. Keep that in mind.
Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
I am in favor of increasing funding from the city to social service agencies to help those in need. I just don't think that the city council is really in the best position to implement this grant program. I mean, increasingly we want to, we as a community, as a city, we're working towards certain outcomes. To have $1 million separate from the executive branch, and when both branches are kind of working towards similar outcomes, it just seems like an artificial wall there that we could be missing out on some collaborative opportunities that city staff may know about and have relationships with agencies that could be furthered by the executive branch taking over this social service funding program. And there's also more expertise in that branch and more bandwidth, perhaps, I mean, that could be discussed, in a department like HAND, where they deal with grants all the time. We are looking at decreases in CDBG funding. So that pot of money is going to get smaller if we increase the Jack Hopkins pot of money. I just feel like to put those two pots in the same department with the same staff overseeing it could lead to efficiencies and more focus on community outcomes. So I know it's not popular to say, but I think Jack Hopkins shouldn't be with the council. We can still send council members to sit on a committee, but why are we administering this?
Councilmember Rallo.
Could I just respond to say, I disagree again. I think that it's been traditionally a role that the council has had. I think that I just described a number of things. I know ESD has done good work, but there's a lot of things that we prescribed in the Sustainability Action Plan that I haven't seen materialize. So if we're going to cede power and $1 million or whatever it is to the administration to administer this, then we will have little oversight, and I don't know what that outcome will be. I think that Jack Hopkins historically has done good work for helping social service agencies. I say if it's not broken, why punt it to the administration? Unless it's to diminish workload, which is we've discussed for the council.
I just think it can be better than it is if we let the administration take it over. But sorry.
And a collaborative approach, I'm absolutely in favor of. I think it could be more collaborative.
Yeah, and I think that generally speaking, like Councilmember Zulik mentioned earlier, one of the challenges of transparency, or one of the challenges that her constituents have mentioned to her, is wanting to have one place to access all of the information about all of the different programs that the city has. And I think that grant funding is one of those places too, where, I mean, there should be one place where all of our grants, possible grants, are listed. Grants for residents, grants for organizations, just so that there's one reference place. And I'm not sure that exists right now. And I think that Councilmember Asari last year mentioned, and I think we talked about this at Jack Hopkins, was, the burden that is on our social service agencies to apply for all of these different grants that are in different places. And so I think somehow consolidating all of that would be really, really helpful to our local organizations, and also to administering in general, no matter who's administering it. And so I think that there's just a lot of collaboration that needs to happen around that topic in general. And I don't know if that should maybe go on there somewhere in terms of investments, maybe in this whole category, but maybe specifically under that concept of doubling Jack Hopkins, to invest time/money in a more coordinated grant administration system for the city. Because it is all city money, and Councilmember Rall, I totally take your point about like ceding power, right, all to the administration. And I think that it is really valuable that one of the things that Jack Hopkins has historically been good at is helping fund the little guy get off the ground. And I think that could still maybe be a really unique role that Jack Hopkins fills specifically, is making sure to help the little guy get off the ground, but that helping support the bigger ones maybe should be somewhere different. Councilmember Rosenberger.
Just chiming in, I think too, since Councilmember Asari started chairing Jack Hopkins, they've been looking at the rubric and more ways to measure, I think, like success of the grant program, right? And like outcome measurement, which I think is great, and more like equity across scoring, I think too, because I've been on the committee for many years, and it was sort of just like what committee members felt like doing, they did. And so I think that's neat that they've been working on that over the last year and a half. I think with this, like increasing Jack Hopkins, I guess I see sort of like a both and here, where like I see Jack Hopkins going to our nonprofits, and then they usually can turn those grant dollars into a lot of help for residents. And I think too, like we have to look at, I mean, I know I talk about looking at our plans and our city goals all the time, but just like there are other ways to help residents financially that can too have bigger bang for the buck, right? Like how housing and transportation costs of a household should not go over 40%, but so many in Bloomington does, I don't know. And so just like, it doesn't look as easy as like, we're giving you money and now this is better for you, but it is something, like as we try to get more affordable housing, and as we try to make people not rely on like one car per person in their household, like if you can get rid of a car, you're saving $8,000 a year, roughly, right? Like that's the average. And so it is also like looking at those like longer pipeline, to me, projects. So like to me, Jack Hopkins is more like immediate funding for our nonprofits to do their good work. And then also our job, I think, is to look at like those down the road changes that we can make to our city that also help a ton of residents at once.
I don't think anything that you just said adds a new piece to this, right? It's just a comment on what's already there. Is that correct?
What's the top part say? We're in the, social lifestyle stuff. Yeah, that's fine, yes.
Okay. Councilmember, sorry, did I see your hand up again?
And maybe then I think we've illustrated something that maybe we should add up to high-performing government, which is pulling that thread again of potential austere times, the challenges, et cetera, that financial challenges that we're going to be facing. I think that, and Jack Hopkins is, I think, a very good illustration of this. I like the way that Councilmember Piedmont Smith described it, of trying to figure out more ways for us to work across departments sort of collaboratively, but in ways that would be effort-saving, cost-saving, et cetera. So, I mean, the idea of bringing under one umbrella all of the various grants of these forms, with sort of one centralized committee that is, ideally still has a strong council voice in it. I really like that proposal. But anyway, so towards moving us towards what that might look like is perhaps in high-performing government, something around cross-cutting programs. And then as I say that, I realize that we may want to think a little bit about auditing processes as we sort of move forward into potentially lean years ahead.
So to try to repeat what you just said, essentially you think that we should add something into high-performing government about about collaboration, essentially.
Yeah.
So like down farther, actually, we have a note about collaboration specifically around substance use.
Mm-hmm. Right with the county there, yeah.
Yeah.
But this
then
across
adding
city
that
departments.
Right, so I think that would end up being an objective maybe, as
Sure.
opposed to an
Sure.
investment
Yeah.
to increase, improve.
Absolutely.
Collaboration between departments and
Yeah.
entities? Is
Exactly.
that-
And then just one more thing maybe to move us off of Jack Hopkins in this health and well-living section, that just as we were talking about Jack Hopkins, I realized that we have not mentioned ambulance and emergency services, which I think is a huge priority, needs to be a huge priority going into this next year.
Okay. That's probably under public safety, which we haven't gotten to yet.
Cool.
Public safety is actually
Yeah.
next. So are we ready to, Councilmember Rosenberger?
Sorry, just looking at those bullets under the neighborhood livability, when you were like, do you want to add anything? But I would say, I guess, I do think those investments are very specific and a lot of them are very much like, I guess, like a single transaction. Like the hand grants are like for a resident to renovate a home or down payment assistance, eviction prevention, which are all great. But what I am talking about is more like widespread benefits, I guess, to residents, right? So it's not I don't know what to call it, single-use sort of grant dollars to one household. It is, though, the investments that, right, like really aren't hand grants or ESD grants, like two artists, one art, I'm not saying those are bad. I'm saying those are good. I'm just saying it's a both and.
So like an ongoing, so you want to add,
Yeah.
the subtitle is Continue, Expand, Direct Grants and Assistance that Support Residents. So you specifically want to add in there, like including ongoing grants, like support for rent or support for.
I think my point is that it's not necessarily grants to residents. It is like our, repaving streets and maintaining our sidewalks and doing those things that make livability easier, right? So
So basically, I'm just trying to figure
I
out
know
how to add
what
it
to
up there.
write, I know.
Yeah.
So I think it's that I'm saying, I think it's more like continued investment in our city plans that benefit like all residents, like it's infrastructure, basically improvements that I think goes into this
Okay.
livability and social.
You think
Health.
that should be livability as opposed to farther down where we have transportation and mobility?
I mean, I understand your question, but yes, because your expenses every month are part of like your social health, I think, and like your ability to even live in a neighborhood, right? So I know that transportation is separate, but I think, I mean, are we, like, it is tied into this, right? And I just think our investments list right now looks very much like individual grants to people beyond Jack Hopkins. That's not to people, it's to nonprofits. But I think like increasing food security to me is about like a citywide program, right? It's not like giving a grocery store a grant. As I don't know, that's like, I'm just trying to explain it. Do you got anything, words to that?
Yeah, does anybody have any concrete way to put that in a one-liner? That's what I'm looking for right now, is a concrete way to put that in a one-liner. Like, I'm not disagreeing in any
I
way,
know,
I'm just
I'm
trying to
trying
figure
to-
out how to write it.
Is that an additional objective or an additional investment or both?
I think it is a way to meet the objectives, right? Like,
To meet which objective?
well, this one, the food security and aiding low-income residents, I mean, those are very similar. So it is like looking at system-wide improvements, I guess, rather than, like, in addition to one-time grants. I guess that's what I would say, like systems-wide improvements. So like looking
A
at,
specific system or
like the
just
food system, right? Like how we talked about, like we can't have a grocery store in a lot of food deserts right now, right? Like, and that takes a change to our UDO, or like a program that helps encourage neighborhood hubs in some way, right? That's like helping residents get what they need where they can walk instead of buy gas to get in their car, right? It's like those things.
So
it's like,
would the investment be identifying system-wide improvements that could be made to facilitate livability, or?
well, yes, but we also have most of those identified in our plans, I would say, right? Like our goals in climate action and the comp plan for like food security, right?
I'm asking real questions just to try to get
Yeah.
up on the thing, I don't know.
Implement objectives in our, yeah, it's fine to say like
Comp
city
plans that-
plans, like
that
that are
support
more
these
like
objectives?
broad reaching, I would say,
Okay.
and like systems improvements. I think that's, I guess, if that's okay.
Okay. I mean, I think that this is definitely, that lead to system improvements, I think. I think this is another one of those examples where we're going to have to like consolidate and clean this up a little bit, which is why there's no way that there's going to be a final draft of this evening. We can hope that there'll be a final draft of this maybe next week so that we can have something that's much more final for our meeting on the 14th with the administration. All right. Moving on to public safety, where Councilmember Piedmont Smith grabbed the objective from last year to support the investment of investing in a non-police community response team, which received a rating of, what was it, for something? 4.22. And other related, just trying to look through right now our budget priorities of 3 and, actually no, between 3 and 3.5 to see if there were any other related public safety things that scored close, and there were not. This would be the place to say something about, Councilmember Asari, you were mentioning ambulances, EMS response. Do you want to talk more about that?
Well, I mean, we have a kind of serious deficiency in the community. We don't have enough ambulances or ambulance attendants, I understand. Have a meeting scheduled for next week to talk a little bit more about this, but yeah, I think people have reported on it. I'm just not immediately on the top of my head right now, but yeah, we have an issue with ambulances. Let me find it out before talking more. So.
Okay. Other comments on public safety? Councilmember Flaherty.
Only briefly that in advocating for follow-through on the legislation we adopted on Safe Streets for All and achieving 0 deaths and 0 serious injuries in our streets, I noted that one might reasonably consider it a public safety investment. I think, in fact, that's maybe what it's best considered. We're talking about preventing, deaths and debilitating injuries that more than most such horrific occurrences are actually, to a significant degree, affected by the decisions we make. Like they're in our control in a way that few things are. So that's all. I don't know if it needs to be noted here necessarily. I'm just noting that I think it's a really strong public safety component.
Yeah, and I'll note that farther down, the Safe Streets for All stuff ended up in transportation. But you're right that is, I mean, I think a lot of things end up related to public safety. I think that public safety especially is one of those like huge overlapping areas, and we talk about public safety and we're mostly thinking about maybe police or fire or EMS response, but that there's kind of like earlier pieces that if the earlier pieces were in better place, then there wouldn't need to be the emergency response because the needs would be met or accidents wouldn't happen or whatever, so. Other feedback, Councilmember Rallo.
I just have a question about what consists of a non-police community response team? Who are they? What do they do? How does this differ from having social workers interact with?
Councilmember Smith.
Usually such response teams include, so they do not include an armed police officer or security officer. They often include some kind of mental health professional, a social worker, and often a peer counselor, somebody who has struggled with substance use addiction, substance use disorders, or mental health problems themselves. They take various forms, but that's the basic gist. And I'm actually going to be learning a lot more about that because I'm going to be attending over several months a training course about community response teams. They've been set up in many cities and have cut down on the need for actual sworn officers.
So this is needed for people who overdose or who are, I don't know, have an emergency that requires, so you call 911, and then a decision is made to deploy the non-police community response team to what type of occurrences?
These are all complex questions, and normally there's an in-depth study of the community and what 911 calls come in and how they're currently handled. And then their specialists, the LEAP Law Enforcement Action Partnership is one of them, and they can advise which types of calls. First of all, that the 911 system has to be more detailed in how they record their calls because a lot of things are in category of other or something non-descriptive. And then that the calls, certain types of calls can be referred to a non-police community response team rather than sending a sworn officer. So these could be anything from, I haven't seen my neighbor in a couple days, can you do a welfare check, to there's somebody screaming at the trees on the Beeline Trail, can you please just see if that person needs help, if somebody is overdosing, I think you'd want an EMS team. So, in a medical emergency, you're still going to want to call an ambulance. But yes, most of them are incorporated into a 911 system, and then the dispatchers are trained to distinguish what kind of assistance they send.
Isn't this what we already have in terms of a community resource officers?
They all work for the police department, and so they are intrinsically part of law enforcement, which makes some people intrinsically fearful of them and can escalate situations. So it is not what we have currently. We have moved in that direction. We also have, I'm happy to remind us all that we have a STRIDE mobile outreach, and they are that kind of team, but they're a small team. They serve at least 2 counties, I think 3 counties. So when you call them now, like I had a constituent who had unhoused folks that were, on his property and seemed to be having some kind of mental crisis. He did not want to call the police. He called Stride Mobile, and they said, well, we can have somebody there in about 2 hours. Well, of course, by that time, the person had gone without getting any assistance. So we do have Stride Mobile. That, I think, would be characterized as this kind of response team, but it is not built into our 911 dispatch protocols, and it is much too small to really deal with the number of calls that we have.
So
But I don't want to get into a seminar.
well, but I don't know if I support this simply because I don't know if it's redundant with what we already have. I mean, couldn't the community resource officers be deployed from somewhere else, or I don't know, is it?
The community resource officers don't really have the same degree of training that most people on such community response teams have. They're more like, neighborhood watch, talk with people, get to know people, sort of folks.
I think that they also respond to vehicular accidents.
Yeah.
And
To what now?
So they're-
to vehicular accidents. I actually remember at some point, an officer sharing, or maybe the chief of police sharing, how very long it takes a sworn officer or anybody really to respond to a vehicular accident, because there's so much reports to write and aftermath, and it just takes a long time. And so for lack of a better word right now, because I'm losing my language, it sucks up a lot of officer time. And so when we have limited sworn officers, the community resource officers do that, because there's not, a danger in that way where you need a sworn officer with a weapon. You need somebody who's going to be able to manage some documentation and manage a scene and direct traffic and, take down insurance reports and all of that kind of stuff. So they do that very well. I really appreciate their response, actually, to a couple of.
Well, thanks for answering, Councilmember Piedmont Smith. I'm just concerned because I'm looking at everything now through the lens of millions of dollars of less revenue for the city, and wondering if adding additional FTEs right now is a good idea.
Sorry, since you said FTEs, that wouldn't necessarily be the case. It would, I envision that a good possibility, and I'll know more in a few months, but a good possibility may be to provide more financial support for Stride, because they already have the setup. But I understand what you're saying.
Other thoughts or questions? Councilmember Ruff.
Yeah, I'm interested in asking Councilmember Flaherty to elaborate a little bit on a comment he made a minute ago regarding the transportation and mobility really affecting public safety. And arguably all of these can affect each other, and public safety is a part of a lot of the other investments in the other outcome areas. I totally agree, but I'm really interested in the idea that if council has areas where we really do have more influence, more input, more involvement, more power over certain outcomes, it might cause me to change some of my ratings and my feelings about some of these issues. And a minute ago, Councilmember Flaherty, you mentioned that you thought that for example, investing $6 to $10 million in priorities on the Safe Streets for All Action Plan is an area where we, as a council, have arguably a lot of influence, a lot of power. And I'd just like you to elaborate on that, because given this would you say that in this administration that has been reduced, and this is maybe an investment that could bring some of that back to us as a council? Do you see sort of what I'm getting at?
I think so. I think we maybe were speaking past one another in a sense. When I used the word "we," I meant the city government as a whole, not the city council specifically. I meant that how, with a few exceptions, state-owned highways that go through our town, we control the transportation infrastructure, we control how it's designed, we control how intersections work, et cetera, et cetera. And so rigorous analysis over many decades around this country and other countries have demonstrated pretty clearly that it's design of streets that are the primary predictors of deaths and serious injuries. It's not enforcement of speeding. It's not, it's a design issue. And so that the design issue is one we control. There's lots that we don't control. Local infrastructure, transportation infrastructure is something we, the city, control. So I think not responsive to your point, but it should clarify what I meant.
That's what I was interested in. Thanks very much for that.
Other comments related to public safety or how it's framed up here? Councilmember, sorry.
I was just remembering from last year, we had discussions around dispatch more, and I believe the investments in specialized dispatch, and that ties back to my ambulance thing as well, about when you have sort of a general dispatch that reports to police, that sometimes they're sort of categorizing things as 5s when they could be 3s, and so they're getting a larger response, and then that's straining resources. So I know that both of the fire union particularly, but then this also comes up with the ambulance question about having sort of specialized dispatch. I think was something that we had in our letter last year that didn't come into this, but so was just reminded of that as well.
So are you saying an investment in dispatch or continued investment?
Funding and training for specialized dispatch per sort of service, I think.
Okay. Do you want to add?
And then I sent you an email with some draft language for what the EMS thing could look like. But
thank you. Yeah, I know that I think dispatch is one of those areas that's continued to be looked at. And I also want to say, actually, while we're talking about SB1, just so that people are realizing, right now dispatch is funded from PS Lit. And so in 2028, when PS Lit is no longer categorized as PS Lit, we're going to have to, and of course dispatch serves not just the city of Bloomington, but the whole county. And so that's going to have to be an area of collaboration. I mean, right now it's an area of collaboration to some degree with PS Lit. It's going to have to be in a slightly different area of collaboration. We're going to have to figure out how to do that differently as a community, as a larger group. So, other comments on public safety? All right, let's move down to the next one, housing and homelessness. And let me actually go back to where I am on here. So that highlight there is that objective was taken out of last year's, and the investments with it in blue, once again, was above 4 stars, continue successful hand support programs, regardless of reductions in HUD funding. Specifically with housing, HAND does some rental assistance, some eviction prevention, some down payment assistance, some home repairs, and of course, they, distribute Section 8 housing. And then scoring slightly lower, 3.5 to 4, were host or co-host a housing summit with builders and funders, bond for or otherwise fund a land bank trust. Comments, questions, suggestions, et cetera. Councilmember Azari.
I think this is all solid. One other idea to just to float is we've made heading home the sort of core institution around executing a lot of this plan, and outside of the ARPA funding that they received back then, they don't have sort of any consistent sort of offering from the city or whatever. So. Which maybe puts them in a little bit of an interesting position to constantly have to, be like a nonprofit basically when they're sort of like a pseudo government entity. So maybe something to float is whether we want to put sort of base funding for heading home in our budget.
Okay, maybe we should put that under a question mark under investments of like heading home with maybe a question, because they did just get like a Lilly grant related to stuff, so they might be okay for the next few years. Investments, and maybe put in parentheses like, or maybe a whole new thing as an investment is continued collaboration with heading home, because collaboration would be not so much financial contribution, but staff time contribution, space potentially for different things. So, good thought. Anything else? Councilmember Rosenberger?
Question for the person who put bond for or otherwise fund a land bank, land trust.
That was Councilmember Rallo.
Are you aware that we have the Summit Hill Community Land Trust at BHA, and so do you mean just further funding that land trust that we already have, or do you mean a second land trust?
Actually, I think that's probably the former is probably
Okay.
most practical.
I think that's,
Although I don't know, I understand that they've been successful, but I don't know specifics, so, but why create a separate land trust if one is operating? So, point well taken, yeah.
Great, I think that sounds.
So maybe put in parentheses, like, determine current support for Summit, for Summit Land Trust?
Maybe like fund the land trust, increase funding. I don't know how much it has, and I know it struggles to get the word out about its housing opportunities, I think.
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that. I was going to mention that too, and you got to it first. Any other housing, homelessness questions, concerns, et cetera? Councilmember Rallo?
Yeah, I don't know if this is possible. I know that West Lafayette did this, and that is limit the number of transient guest houses, i.e. Airbnbs, which seem to occupy between 800 and 900 former owner-occupied homes. Maybe they're part-time occupied, but the point is that they're rentals, and we have a housing shortfall specific in that category of homes, and so this seems to me a fairly cheap way in which we could address it. It's legislative, as you pointed out, President Strasburg today, but it would take collaboration with the administration and would probably take up some hand staff time for enforcement.
Yep, so that scored, the category was limit Airbnbs, and it scored a 3.33. And, I'll trace us back to the slideshow from earlier that had the columns that we didn't really talk about was the cost, and that cost was basically like a rough guesstimate kind of in comparison to each other. And some of these things that maybe kind of just missed the mark, like the limiting Airbnbs, but were really low cost, might be low-hanging fruit that we want to prioritize. And similarly, like UDO changes, potentially to some degree a low cost, especially taking steps now toward where we want to end up, that might be low cost, that we want to pursue in different ways. And if they're low cost, I mean, regulating Airbnbs, I think would require council time, it would require staff time, it would require legislative time, but it wouldn't necessarily require a budget line. And so those are the kinds of things that, do we want to put them on this list, or do we want to have them kind of in our own bucket of things to do? Councilmember Rosenbarger.
Hi, thanks. I probably ranked the Airbnb low on the budget because it theoretically can cost very little. But really, it is a staff time problem. I've had a draft ordinance since we had Stephen with us, but there's been like no staff time to help develop this. And also because one route is take an ordinance that basically the state has already said is okay, the Gary, Indiana ordinance, and just do it here. And it has very minimal impact. You pay a one-time registration fee of $100. But what we would probably need if we're regulating 800 more homes in the city is another hand employee. So like there is that cost. And then a more complicated ordinance is that we can add probably a rental inspection to our Airbnbs, which I think we should for safety's sake. And that is a more complicated ordinance to write. And right now it's just hard to find the time because, right, we don't have staff.
Yeah.
So it's both our staffing issues and probably then adding a hand inspector or two. But I think it is great.
For reference, you actually ranked that a 4, so.
I think I ranked that as a 4, quite high, actually. Yes.
Yeah. Other comments on housing, homelessness? All right, moving on to Health and Human Services, where there were several things that ended up ranking really high on Health and Human Services. And this is another one of those areas where, you know, potentially there's some overlap with say, the Jack Hopkins conversation and that concept of city money supporting various social service agencies. So 2 big objectives: collaborating with other government entities and nonprofit groups to prevent and treat substance use disorders and help people in recovery, partnering with the county on opioid settlement funds, continuing and expanding and/or expanding the Centerstone Partnership and exploring other partnerships to employ people in recovery. Those things go together. And then in red, supporting mental health services in Bloomington by the investment of the $200,000 in co-location of mental health services and existing social service agencies. Would anybody like to speak to this category? Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
For the $200,000 in co-location of mental health services, I wonder if other entities are already pursuing that. I thought the Bloomington Health Foundation was working on something similar. But yeah, I would like to know more about what's already been being done in that space before I ask for that dollar amount.
Councilmember Daley, you suggested that one. Do you have any information about what's being done in other spaces?
I don't have any information about what's being done in other spaces. I know that from what I was able to learn, we are below the state average with mental health providers per resident. I believe we have 1 mental health provider per 800 residents. So we need more services. So for example, you know, if we were to embed clinicians in 3 community centers, we can reduce wait lists by 20%. Evansville has done a similar program. So this was modeled off of that idea.
Do we not have enough service providers because we don't have enough spaces for them to provide service, or because we just don't have enough people working in that field who are living here?
I don't know, certainly. I would say it's the second one, would be my guess. I know that it's hard to find providers because I don't think we have enough working, but I don't know for certain. I don't have that data.
Okay. I
And-
guess I'm kind of hesitant to like put that
Yeah,
put that
and I mean,
number
I put the
without
200
like really
yeah.
knowing more information, so I wonder if
Well, like
it
Councilmember
should
Flaherty
be-
had said earlier, I thought we were supposed to give specific.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So that was why I came up with that number. I
would-
understand that.
Right, would a rephrasing of like, would a rephrasing of that without a specific dollar figure, but kind of prioritizing this as a concept that needs to be explored, and then leaving it to the administration to maybe figure out how exactly it would be employed work? Or is this something that you think needs to be a more solid, fleshed out idea? And in that case, can you help do some of that background work to, like, what should we do with this?
Yeah, I mean, part of that number came from, again, that Evansville project, $60,000 per site for staffing plus $20,000 for training. So, that would be all based on if we were doing, these 3 centers, for example. But,
Okay.
I would be happy to make it more generalized right now if we're working on it, and then do some of the background work too.
Okay. Do other people have thoughts about that? Maybe we can work on that over the next week.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, thank you.
sure. Other thoughts in general on the Health and Human Services? Okay. Moving down to equity. And it scored highly to incorporate equity as a value throughout all city operations. That was kind of a question. The other equity-related note that did not score highly was a more specific, I'm looking for it, $200,000 to $400,000 for integrating and operationalizing equity within city government, scored only a 2.89, and so those are kind of like different but related. That's why I'm pointing those out as kind of different, because it's probably more of an objective to incorporate it throughout all city operations, and then going, okay, what are specific investments that might make that happen? Because one specific investment is, to actually put that money toward it, to operationalize it. Do people have thoughts on this? I know it's getting late. We're almost done, y'all. Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
I think it was Councilmember Flaherty that gave the dollar figures. If I could just ask him to explain, would that be for consultants, or what did you have in mind?
I think the exact expenditures would, again, have to be something that's explored. We did go through a scoping exercise, a sort of landscape analysis of cities that are leading on this front, as well as, governmental and non-governmental entities that provide assistance and best practices. Options include staffing, significant local and maybe non-local, who knows, contractor supports to develop a robust framework to overhaul existing plans, to set and define what equity and different dimensions of equity and justice mean to us as a city, what it is we're trying to achieve, setting metrics, convening deep community engagement, especially with groups that are historically and currently excluded from process or not represented in process, on and on. I mean, there's different flavors of what this could look like. I guess I feel highly confident that if we don't budget money for this, and we simply just continue to say that equity is a value that we incorporate in value, in all of city government, that will continue to, I guess in my view, not do very well on that front. So, I think doing it right and doing it seriously takes investment. Again, we had meetings about that last year in the council process committee. It also came up in the budget cycle, and the administration mentioned that they were going to be assessing things internally and convening a team and making a plan. So we could hear from them where they're at on that process. But again, I do feel confident that it would actually take investment to make meaningful change here.
I have a question for those of you who've been in this position for a while. Haven't there been past kind of specific investments in that? Like, I guess I remember hearing about equity trainings. I remember hearing about some of these other things. So I guess the question that I have related to that is that there have been some specific investments already, and have those things yielded more permanent change or adjustments? And like, what should or could we do better in terms of investing in the future in terms of more specific things? Councilmember Flaherty, do you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. I think there was about a one-year-long series of trainings that were conducted for the mayor, department heads, and council members as they were available. I think it was pretty well done. It was a good set of trainings overall. I think folks were arriving to that with all sorts of different perspectives and backgrounds, but I think it was valuable for those individuals. The vast majority of those individuals no longer work in the city of Bloomington, or at the city or for city government. There was never the training probably lacked a roadmap for where we go from there. There was discussion about the need for training staff at all levels. That this isn't information that people would just know. It takes learning. It takes ongoing and recurring learning. We do have staff turning over, so probably take some type of investment in regular training. I think some departments, to a degree, do this a little bit in-house. I think we've heard positive things from CFRD over the years on that front. I think some professions, like the planning profession, probably the housing profession, others, there's a little bit of that built into the standards of professional certifications around equity and policy. Like, that's getting better in the landscape as well. So that, there's stuff around the edges here. We lack fully like a systematic approach to how we would pursue training, how we would pursue whether or not to have staff expertise internally to actually help people on this front. Whether, again, actually our plans and goals and the metrics we set to track, to try to achieve outcomes and actually craft goals that are equitable and inclusive, the metrics themselves, like all of that takes, you could do it without staff support. I think it gets harder. There's a whole range of options, but again, like, it would have to grow beyond one discrete time-limited set of training that doesn't really have anything to follow from it. Like,
So can we put something up there under investment, like ongoing training and support for individuals at all levels, like, of staffing? And I think that might be a suggestion.
What do you all think of what I've typed up there? Hire consultants to engage the community in defining equity and identifying desired outcomes, to train and guide city staff and electeds, and to incorporate equity into city processes.
I feel like we need to add something about system, about assessing the systems that we use, assessing and changing the systems that we use to reflect. I feel like what I just heard Councilmember Flaherty said was that we did these trainings and that there were maybe some identifications of things that could change or should change, but then those things didn't actually change. Is that?
I don't think it got to a point of being actionable. It didn't get to the point of actually interrogating how we make decisions or how we fund certain things or the goals and outcomes we set for ourselves and whether or not those actually are including equity metrics or targets. Like, it didn't get to that level. It was training more in the abstract. It might have included like reflecting on how this shows up in your role and your work and, you know, small discussion groups and that kind of thing. But it wasn't, so it was a meaningful level of depth for training, you know, professionals on how to understand and incorporate equity in their professional practice. But I don't think it went far enough to really operationalize much of that. And so I like what Councilmember Piedmont Smith has written generally. I think it covers some bases. I think when I talk about operationalizing it, that's what I mean across these different areas. It's a little hard to scope the whole thing in advance.
Yeah. And one of the other things, this is kind of an aside right now, but not really. One of the things that got mentioned in the fiscal committee meeting earlier in terms of cost is, public commented it, the idea of things being a one-time cost or things being ongoing costs. And so to me, I feel like this investment would need to be categorized as like, it needs to be an ongoing investment and an ongoing cost because, like, as you mentioned, in like planning and some of those other very specific fields, like in terms of their own certifications, they have to do specific things, I think, with their specific fields in an ongoing way to reflect changes, and that this would need to be done in an ongoing way to reflect changes.
And I'm sure you'd probably want some minimum level of commitment that went beyond what we did previously, I guess. Like
Right.
Maybe like a 3-year
Right.
time horizon. Some of this will
Right.
produce discrete outcomes that are maybe maintained over time but aren't the same level of recurring cost. To the extent that we're investing in training for staff, you know, I think you would assess that over time. And is this working? Is it meeting objectives? Then
Right.
revisit. But I think, yeah, probably some multi-year. I mean, it's hard to. We're budgeting for a year, but you know, the notion that we would intend to have some commitment to this for, you know, a reasonable
Yeah.
period of time is probably a good idea.
Right. I mean, we don't want, in general, I would say that we don't want to say like, oh, we're going to invest in this stuff one year and then the next year we're just going to like send it by the wayside and not even remember that it exists or whatever. So I think that that's just important to keep in mind. Any other either comments about equity or, I mean, we just added something here that was not in our survey earlier or like ranked below that threshold that we talked about earlier. So if anybody objects to the concept or what is phrased here, you should also bring that up. Councilmember Rosenbarger.
I thought just to add a finer detail, we use this Center for Equity and Inclusion. So just like when we say hire consultants, like that is fine, but we did a year, there still are a lot of us left that did a year of work with these consultants and who got to know Bloomington pretty well, I would say. So, I mean, I think there are 1, 2, 3, are there 5, 4 of us here that did it, you know, and some department heads still left, you know, and it was great, like working with like Chief Decoff and folks on that, I would say. So if we wanted to like put that detail in, that is who we used, and they were pretty up for like working on a roadmap and everything when we left them.
Do you want to add that in, Councilmember Piedmont Smith? Just as a reference of who we hired before. Councilmember Asari.
Just a quick thought. I think this the framing is really good because both the objective and then the focus here. I might have the sort of training and stuff before the hiring, but that's irrelevant at this point. But I don't think we ever should be specific about who to hire. I think that you always have to have open, you know, sort of calls for proposals and so on. So, you know, certainly isn't us saying, oh, let's give money to this particular organization to do a preordained task, but rather, I like the openness of it instead of the sort of specificity. But if we do want to capture that, we could just sort of say, continue the training that was started a year ago.
Or consider maybe.
Yeah, I
Consider
mean,
using
well,
the same consultant.
I mean, I wasn't saying use them again, I'm saying like that is a detail, that is who we used, you
Yeah,
know?
so
And they had
consider-
to apply, via, you know,
Yeah.
RFQ
Yeah, RFPM.
and everything, so it was a process, yes.
Okay. Any other comments on equity? This meeting is going very long, so,
Almost done.
yeah, we are almost done. All right. Our last outcome area that made it on this letter in terms of scoring above 3.5 is transportation and mobility. And so as you can see, the objectives came verbatim from last year. That's why they're highlighted up there. And then the two investments that also scored between the 3.5 and 4 were really similar, kind of in some ways a lot of overlap between spending $6 to $10 million on priorities and Safe Streets for All, or 8, we missed out an M for million on sidewalks and multi-use paths. Yeah. I don't think that typos count. So $8 million invested in sidewalks, multi-use paths, bike lanes, intersection improvements, with a question on the side of like, should these be combined? I think that we've already kind of said that we're going to have to fine tune this language a little bit. So yeah, Councilmember, sorry.
This one with the dollar figure, I think we were told that we were like $20 million behind in deferred maintenance, and so I'm wondering, as much as this is the largest thing we're asking for, if this is pegged correctly, if it should be larger is what I'm asking.
Well, and that's actually an interesting thing to note because, I mean, there was the doubling paving as well, and especially because with some paving, like repaving can often come with some element of redesign, which could then improve safety. So there's also that overlap, which I think was in government's effective governance or something like that. Government, high-performing government. So there is that overlap as well, which could maybe be worked in there. Other comments, thoughts, questions, transportation and mobility? It's 9 o'clock. We're all going to get punchy here now. We haven't even had public comment yet. I'm impressed with all you public that are still out there right now. I hope this was interesting. Other comments on transportation and mobility? Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
I guess I need to look at the Safe Streets for All action plan again, but 6 to 10 million, is that, like, is there a timeline in the Safe Streets for All action plan, like, within 3 years, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and then within 5 years, we're going to do these other things? And so I guess I'm trying to put the 6 to 10 million in relation to all the recommendations in the plan. Does anybody know? I think Councilmember Flaherty, maybe it was your figure again.
I'd have to dig into it more deeply as well. This is coming, my understanding more broadly is that the Safe Streets for All action plan does not supplant the transportation plan, which is really where more of the infrastructure components live, with the exception of a comprehensive look at sidewalks. The transportation plan does cover multi-use paths as a significant portion of pedestrian infrastructure, but not sidewalks. So with that limitation, the transportation plan is still where kind of the infrastructure plan lives, and the Safe Streets for All action plan is more tactical in a sense about the policies and types of things that we are changing and doing and applying, to increase safety. I think the other thing it brings is an increased lens or focus on high crash corridors and portions of the network as a focus area. And so I think, I think it brings in safety as a stronger emphasis in the factors going into helping shape what the priority infrastructure investments are. And so the transportation plan had a priority network, multimodal network, that had a 6-year implementation timeline that is closing at the end of this year, and I think we probably achieved about 70% of it or something like that. I've talked to staff about this. I think there's an anticipation that there will be an update to the next set of priority investments, probably on something like a 5-year time horizon that can line up with MPO, funding windows and planning schedules, and that the Safe Streets for All action plan would meaningfully inform how that next set of priority infrastructure, which would be incorporated into a transportation plan update, gets defined. And so we're kind of in a little bit of a limbo space of like, this sidewalk plan is ostensibly in development. We need to create an updated, kind of set of infrastructure investment priorities, while at the same time figuring out whether and how we're going to complete the set of priorities we set for ourselves, some of which are not yet complete. Like a small example, I was moving as a pedestrian on East 17th Street the other day between the bypass and David Baker Avenue. And like we haven't finished. We've got a significant part of 17th Street multimodal infrastructure now. That stretch does not, very dangerous for pedestrians, connects to a multi-use path that goes directly to the hospital. Anybody on the northwest side could really benefit from that connection. So there are still some pretty critical pieces of the network that we identified and committed to that we have not yet implemented. So this figure, to get back to the point, is my best guess based on extensive conversations over time with the city engineer about the total level of capital investment needed to meet the ambition of the infrastructure deployment that we've talked about for safety and climate goals and accessibility. Taking into account that we'll be leveraging lots of federal and state dollars. So this isn't like the sum total of the annual expense that would be needed. It's my best guess based on conversations with the expert of how much we would need to be able to match from local sources. And not everything would be matched. Some sidewalk investments or whatever, might not necessarily be, not everything will be leveraging some other funding source, but I think to the maximum extent possible, we try to do that. So that's just, if I kind of had broken down into a few different buckets, for instance, and was thinking kind of 2 million plus for these different buckets. One of those buckets was sidewalks. I think anybody who served on the sidewalk committee is, probably all of us are keenly aware that $300,000 to $500,000 a year on sidewalks is not getting the job done on meeting some of these key safety gaps and other issues. So it's an imperfect estimate. It's my best guess based on a lot of conversations with staff about it.
Thank you. I also want to note another piece that maybe we should add in black, that continue or expand investments related to transportation safety and efficiency, including bump outs, street redesign, busing, leading pedestrian intervals, and more, scored a 3.44. So that's another one of those things that was really close, that also kind of connects potentially with whatever ultimate rewording ends up happening, or maybe expansion of language ends up happening in terms of that investment. Yeah, it's a 3.44, so whatever.
I assume I rank that as a 4, but that's a joke. But I just thought it was included pretty much in the 6 to 10 million and the 8 million, I guess, the bump outs and everything. To me, it is part of the plan and the network. How was the 6 to 10 million based on staff conversations, pretty much?
Did you just ask a question, or? Okay, okay.
So is this different? Is this expand investments related to transportation safety and efficiency? Is that different from the 8 million and the 6 to 10 million?
Well, they're two different categories of thing, and so that's where the expand investments one specifies. So that was actually mine. So it specifically specifies some of the lower cost interventions, as well as the larger things. So street redesign is on there, which is maybe more expensive, but bump outs are a lower cost item. Leading pedestrian intervals is a lower cost item. Those are things that are kind of being done now, but it's one of those how much money is being invested in that now. And at least wanting to maintain or increase that, and that also kind of falls under this category of thing. And I mean, if part of that 6 to 10 million is partly like about matching grants, like that might be two different like categories of funding under transportation. Because it's,
I just find this well, maybe not pay for transportation infrastructure maintenance, but the other three items are just kind of all wishy-washy in my mind, and if we could somehow make them more clear. I mean, maybe keep them separate, but say, okay, here's the one about, infrastructure, here's the one about implementing our transportation plan, here's the one about increasing safety, something like that, because right now it's like, invest money on all these things. Mm-hmm. Do we have a priority? Do we have, I don't know, I understand that there are different types of investment, but it's not clear from maybe the abbreviation we're using here.
are you asking what's like the highest priority of those investments, or?
No, I'm saying not necessarily tonight, but at some point I would like to make this more clear.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure I'm capable of making it more clear tonight. Does anybody feel more capable of making it more clear tonight? Okay. I'm sorry, Councilmember Rosenberger? What was that?
Is it possible just to ask the person who, are those two different?
I can't quite hear you.
Are those two different people pay for transportation infrastructure and expand investments? Are they not covered in, they're not mine, I guess. Are they covered in the top two, or are they seen as different by the people who wrote them?
I still had a hard time hearing you, and I'm sorry about that. So the 6 to 10 million on priorities for Safe Streets for All was you.
Yeah.
8 million split between sidewalks, multi-use paths, et cetera, was Flaherty. Infrastructure maintenance was referenced tonight by ESOC, but also maybe applies to Rollo's doubling the repaving budget. And then expanding investments was mine. So are you asking, like, do those bottom two, like, are they included in the top two? Is that what
Yeah, I'm asking if you are the bottom one, do you think it's included? Do you feel like yours is included in the top two?
I think that it could be included in the top two. And so those specific examples could be, yeah, like that could be fleshed out within those two. And what I'm not sure about is whether the first two could be combined together. I mean, could the first two be combined together in terms of that 6 to 10 million versus the 8 million?
Probably.
I
think they're similar but slightly distinct, but they both demonstrate a need for additional conversation. This should be guided by plans and established priorities, some of which we have. We are in a bit of a transition phase between ending one period and starting another, and needing to develop some of these things, but I think the magnitude is about right.
And I think it's appropriate to leave both in, just because it, again, to Councilmember Flaherty's point, it sets, like, we want to talk about both of these things very seriously, and we want serious investment in them. It's signaling that clearly.
Okay. But so we're saying leave the first two in and
Yes.
roll the essence of the second two into the first two in terms of deferred maintenance and making sure to keep the conditions of what we have in good shape, and then also remembering some of these other lower cost things.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
It's not just street redesign, it's
Got it,
bump
yeah.
outs and
Exactly.
pedestrian intervals.
I would, given the direction that the letter's going in, I would leave it as is currently. Sort of similar to the conversation we were having earlier. I think that there's space to, continue to refine this, but I think that we sort of have opted rather to be a bit broad at this stage. So I'm okay at this stage at
Right. For the next edit round, like.
Precisely, yeah.
incorporating those two
I
in.
do
Okay,
think,
great.
and after our discussions on, at our next meeting. I had another thing, can I opine on something?
Yeah.
I'd just like to re-pitch for, the benefit of a circulator bus in this context. I know that it scored low, it was on there, but.
It scored a 3, yeah.
It was on the cusp. I think, and I'll couch this in another topic. I think that it overlaps with questions of economic development, which are absent from our letter, and I mean that's. For partially my fault, probably, for not coming up with better ideas. But I think thinking about needing to bring more people downtown, keeping people downtown, and especially with us having a great football team, potentially a good basketball team, I think it's a really good opportunity. The convention center, all these type of things. I think that it's sort of ripe for a circulator bus, and we did adopt. Before my time, but we did adopt a resolution around that. So I would like to always keep that in the dialogue and conversation around transportation.
Okay.
I second that.
That's noted. I'm not sure if that means that we should put it on here. It did score 3, which is the lowest of the rating list. I'll go ahead and say that I think that I personally ranked that a little bit lower, partly because I was thinking about what should we invest in next year. And I'm not sure that I'm not sure that that's the 2026, as opposed to maybe a little bit farther down the road.
But I do think maybe, and maybe this for our conversation with the Office of the Mayor is, we're going to have hard conversations about maintaining offers and sort of things that we might want to cut. And I think we have to have some type of a conversation and a rubric for thinking about how do we make those decisions? And I'm proposing to us that one way and something that should be in our decision making, and this is why I'm so high on us investing heavily in infrastructure, for example, because I think that has a long-term return on investment. And so I think that and there's lots of other cities who have gone through the type of things that we are about to go through across Indiana, things that they've adopted. One, outcome-based budgeting is one thing that a lot of people have done to sort of deal with these type of fiscal difficulties. But the second is that they invest smartly in things that are going to return investment. So that's something that I just think about a lot, and I think hasn't been in our discussion this evening. But then that brings to the broader conversation of, I do think that we do need to have that conversation, whether amongst ourselves or with the Office of the Mayor, of saying, what are some principles that are going to guide our thinking around things that don't get retained in our budget.
Yeah. All right, other thoughts around transportation? All right. That is the end of the letter. I think that the conclusion about the letter right now is that we need to work in some of these modifications and changes and incorporate, and then bring it back to the whole body again as before we can even consider voting on it. But we can noodle that while we have public comment around anything that we have discussed this evening. So we have Councilmember Rallo.
Are we voting on the letter tonight?
The letter's not ready to vote on
Okay,
tonight.
good.
So, yeah.
I misunderstood what you said.
Oh, yeah, no, no, I don't think that that's possible this evening.
Good.
So the next order of our agenda is public comment. So if you are a member of the public
Is there time for concluding remarks?
Yeah, after public comment.
Okay.
So if you're a member of the public who are interested in letting us know what you think about our budget priorities or this discussion tonight, you can make your way to the podium, and you'll have please introduce yourself, and then you'll have 3 minutes. And if you are on Zoom, please let us know that you're interested in speaking by using the reactions tab to raise your hand, or you can send a chat message to the host. So let's go ahead and start here in Chambers.
Good evening, Madam President. This is Christopher Imdry from the Greater Bloomington Chamber of Commerce. It wasn't a meeting today. It was outcome-based budgeting and some budget goals and some other things. And I don't really want to critique individuals' priorities. I did like the packet that kind of sort of outlined those. I wanted to return to a point that Councilmember Asari had noted, which is looking at this in the lens of SB1 and where we sort of are in funding. And we need return of investment. This has to look like investments. There's some, I mean, you had a lot of good areas in there, but some of them are just kind of Band-Aids, I think. So it's important, I think, in investing in that, in the core infrastructure. We're talking streets, sidewalks, and parks to maintain competitiveness and quality of life. We need to be increasing that pie to bring people in here to move and keeping up with our assets. We have a lot of great assets here and not deferring maintenance on them, which will just catch up in the long run. We got to play the long game on this and not just the short game. We have to look at things investments that's going to bring in private investment and not just rely on city tax dollars. Those projects that are going to bring that. I think one of the great things, one of the great investments the city made was the Beeline Trail, which has brought all sorts of private investment in. Like consultants and bringing those in has been brought up a few times, and I'm thinking the ugly words of, audits and operational efficiency, the BOBs across city departments to sort of maximize efficiency. We're kind of at that point now. I lived through the Great Recession, 2008, where in Arizona they were rifting everybody at 80% FTE and turning the air conditioner up to 80 degrees. And, we don't want to be there. We got to start planning ahead. We know what the situation is, and we've seen where those numbers go. It gets worse in a few years. So this is now the time to plan. One other thing in the, talked about parks and the master planning, and I don't know if I was invited to the focus group, but I did show up, and one of the things noted in there was really making sure that we're doing the upkeep in the parks. We just had a ribbon cutting at Hopewell Commons. We just need to make sure that we are doing that upkeep in all of the parks and making sure that those are the places people want to visit. I could see I was in Winslow not long ago, and those baseball fields are hurting as far as looking like they're from the Bad News Bears 1976 set. I mean, it does not look like a lot of investment there. And we started to make sure that we are keeping up on those. And they also mentioned we wanted in the master plan, the ability to sort of do an inventory there with the Parks Department and sort of the upkeep. And they said that is a very expensive tool. So just looking at that, but I think that was a great idea by Councilmember Versari. And my time is up. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have anybody online who has raised their hands? Council Attorney Lehner?
Yes, there's one hand raised.
Okay, let's go ahead and go to Zoom then for that comment. When you're unmuted, please state your name for the record, and then you'll have 3 minutes.
Yeah, this is Kevin Keogh. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I believe you talked early on about transparency in government. And I guess my suggestion, my to the community as a whole is the data quality and having an initiative. Maybe you already do. I'm not aware of it, but a governance team that would be made up of 4 different areas that would focus on the quality of data. First, you have to have leadership. Of course, the common council would be very important with that, plus the mayor. But to come up with a data, the quality of data framework, define policies, standards, and processes for data quality, and just lead it. But you're going to have also your technical people, your data engineers, your data architects, to make sure that the data is structured and it's formatted correctly. You need the database administrators. Of course, so the key is that you need technical people, plus the data users and analysts. You want to make sure they're trained about data quality standards and that they keep up and they maintain those standards. Then you need citizens and community involvement. And that's the key one, because I guess as an example would be just last week at the Board of Public Works, there was a contract that was discussed. And they had a scope of work. They were increasing this contract for uh, uh, some, the coming up with how they're going to design college and Walnut. And so it was $120,000 original contract, and they were going to add another 94,000. The key thing was the scope of work. You could not read it, and it was pointed out by a member of the public, a private citizen, plus a member of the board. So it's that kind of information. When you get it, the data was actually corrupt. And I guess looking at a framework, I don't know how the board could actually have continued on with that meeting and actually vote on it because you couldn't read what the scope of work was. And I also bring up the December 11th Common Council meeting when a member of the public brought up an issue that person had about a statement made by someone on the city council that there was a 200% increase in the use of certain type of transportation on the 7th Line Trail. And basically the member of the community was making a point about how did they come up with that data and really looking at how good was the data, what was the quality of the collection, which I think is important. That's part of what the public should do. I guess the thing was there wasn't a process to really treat that type of comment with the respect it was due, that get back to that person to make sure that there's an answer to that statement about doubling the mode of transportation on the 7th Street line, what do you call it, the 7 line? Was that a true statement? So anyway, that's my point. I think transparency in government is a very important issue. As a member of the community trying to understand this, I hope I'm not going over. I don't have my 3-minute thing here, but anyway, I just wanted to make that point, and I would hope that you consider that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and next here in chambers. Please come on forward, state your name for the record, and then you'll have 3 minutes. And
good evening. I'm Paul Russo. I have a statement about the danger of Bloomington streets. While riding my bicycle on a sunny afternoon in late June last year, I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. A reckless driver made a fast left turn with a wide arc, thereby sweeping through my side of a perpendicular street. I had just stopped and was creeping forward to check for cross traffic, hoping to make a left turn. When I saw the car, I had only half a second to react. There was not enough time for me to dodge, but there was enough time for her to brake. Instead, she accelerated through me at about 25 to 30 miles an hour. I had never had a broken bone in my life, but the bumper of her car broke my right tibia in 3 places and my fibula in 1 place. The bicycle and I flipped sideways, crashing into her windshield and cracking it. Then I was launched upside down into the air, rotating over her car and landing on my upper back, cracking a rib. That part could have been much worse, as I could have landed on my head, breaking a cervical vertebra instead. Before the ambulance arrived, a passerby put a blanket over my leg to protect the splintered bone that was jutting out. I was in surgery with 3 doctors for 2.5 hours the next morning. The surgery was complicated enough to require an ambulance trip to Methodist Hospital in Indianapolis, where surgeons had the necessary expertise. My surgeon required my tibial plateau fracture by inserting a titanium plate with 12 screws into my tibia. This will be part of my body for the rest of my life. After 3 weeks in hospitals, I eventually spent 10 long weeks in a nursing home. The trauma, the opioids, and the sudden inactivity had profound effects on my entire health. For about 30 years, I had ridden a bicycle almost every day. But after being mangled on the streets of Bloomington, my bicycling mileage suddenly went to 0 from July through January, 7 whole months. I'm now finally regaining a sense of normal. I can walk without a cane, and I resumed bicycling in February, sporadically at first, and now almost every day. I'm still unable to completely straighten my right knee, which causes me to walk with a limp. I remain hopeful for further improvements in my condition, but one thing is crystal clear: this was a life-changing event. I feel like I aged 7 years in 7 months. Why did this happen? The main reason was excessive speed. I suspect the driver was going 40 miles an hour on 3rd Street that day, like so many others, and then she slowed down to 25 to make her turn. That excessive turning speed caused her to make the wide turn into my side of the street. That excessive speed shattered my leg and launched me into the air. A collision with a compact car at 15 miles an hour would not have caused that kind of damage. Please remember what you probably learned in high school physics. The kinetic energy of an object in motion is proportional to the square of the velocity. That is why a car moving at 26 miles an hour has 3 times the energy of the same car moving at 15 miles an hour. There's an epidemic of speeding in Bloomington. If you want safe streets, then you must put a priority on reducing the speed of motor vehicles. You must thoroughly enforce the speed limits. Thank you.
Thank you. It looks like you wrote that out. If you wanted to send that, if you wanted to email that to us as well, that would be great. And if you could let us know the intersection that happened on, I would appreciate that as well. Thank you.
Pictures I was going to show, but I guess it's not usual for the, so I can email those to you too.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm glad you're walking here today. Do we have anybody on Zoom?
No.
Okay. Next in chambers, please state your name for the record, and then you'll have 3 minutes.
Steve Olin. There's, of course, too much that you've debated tonight to comment on in 3 minutes. But after listening to the sheer breadth of this debate, I want to focus on the single most significant investment that I think you could make this year. And I say that as someone who wants to see a downtown circulator, which, by the way, you could fund with a cost of living increase and meter rates, but that's a debate for another night. It's the council's own budget. For years, you've shortchanged yourselves. Oversight is an essential part of your duties. Statutorily, who else is in a position to check or rein in the performances of the administration? It can't just be boards and commissions doing that when the administration names half the membership of those boards, and the liaisons for those boards also don't work for council. Right now, it's all you can do to follow it all. This is in no way to say that the administration is not trying its level best, but council will not achieve all of its commendable objectives with carrots alone. The council does not have to threaten to hold up the entire budget to make clear that it has sticks as well as carrots. As Councilmember Flaherty pointed out, your lack of specificity now and your lack of willingness to use line item cuts closer to the budget deadline will result in more of the same blithe shrugging off of council priorities. Either you're willing to use your powers or you're not. Regardless of your future discussions over elected salaries, you're still going to be part-time, but the council can hire attorneys and researchers. You've already heard Ms. Lehner describe the need for JD time, let's call it, whether that's in-house or outside council, additional hours you want to add. I also want to recommend that you consider investing in researchers. You need staff to attend meetings for you, to gather and dig into data for you, to develop language for you, and to act as your liaisons on your behalves to every corner of the city. A minimum of 3 researchers would open up opportunities for council members to do more. 1 for each 3 members who could assign that person to do the basic research that you all have been lacking every time you say you don't know the details, every time a department's head says, I'll get back to you, without worrying that you're using valuable lawyer time. Think of them as 1 for each nominating committee if you have to, but the fact is that a more ambitious council, this is a more ambitious council than the city has seen. If you're serious about oversight, as you should be, and you're serious about working with the administration, and if you're serious about alleviating the workload of your existing staff, whose travails you're well aware of, you have to assert yourselves for the most basic council need. Everything else you've been saying you want to do depends on your capacity to track it all. Don't be afraid to invest in the basic resources you need to do your jobs to your fullest. hire some more researchers, ask for them in this budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Has anybody raised their hand on Zoom in the intervening time?
No, there are no hands raised.
Okay, anybody else in chambers want to come forward with a comment? All right, seeing none. Yes, Councilmember Rallo, there is a little note on the schedule. Our last one is final comments / vote on priorities list. I placed it like that because maybe we would have been ready to vote on a priorities list, but I definitely do not think that we are right now. My goal would be to use the next few days to clean up that letter a little bit in response to some of the things that we've talked about tonight, and hopefully manage to get that released with the packet, though I'll bet that it would have to end up being a packet addendum next week, maybe. We'll have to figure that out at the staff level, how exactly the timing to do that. So hopefully we do have something that is much closer, if not a final draft that we can actually vote on and hopefully have consensus around so all of us can vote yes next week. We'll cross our fingers on that. Does there anybody want to make a final comment? Councilmember Rallo.
Yes, thanks. And I want to thank the gentleman for coming this evening and sharing that story. It was certainly an emotional experience, and I had a similar accident, but I wasn't injured. I mean, I was bruised, but I didn't have any broken bones. But I had a driver pull in front of me, and I flew over her car. And it does bring home the point that, safe streets also consist of enforcement. And in order to adhere to speed limits, we need sworn officers to enforce them. Unfortunately, for the last 15 years, we've had a deficiency of officers, and I lay blame largely, not entirely, but on the previous administration. The situation is better now. The police are better compensated. There was, I think, unanimity in their contract, I believe. And I hope to get up to, I'm sure we all hope to get up to the number of police officers that was specified in the Novak report, which came out some years ago, which is, I believe, 105 officers, and we're still deficient. It's ironic to me that there is a speed limit sign on Walnut, which is 20 miles an hour, which is a slower speed than on my own residential street. It makes no sense whatsoever, and I see people routinely speeding, and yet we do not, seem to have, well, there hasn't been a priority to have the number of officers needed to do that kind of work. As tedious as it is, it's important. So thank you for coming. I wanted to reflect on what Christopher MG said, which is I think that this has been a good process. I think I benefited from the discussion. I know what people's priorities are. I think people are very conscientious, and I think that their requests are make very much sense to me. However, within the context of SB1, we're entering a period of austerity. And I don't think even my requests at this point are going to be necessarily practical, with the exception, and I'll return to that in a moment, but the period of austerity is such that cuts in state funding are getting progressively worse year by year. So that will happen. We have a lit rate cap of 1.2%. We don't know what that's going to yield in terms of our deficit. We have restrictions on GO bonds, so we can't utilize that. So we're going to have to think about essential maintenance and operations, and we're going to have to evaluate what is discretionary and can be cut. It seems necessary to me. So thinking we're going to be getting certain things funded above and beyond what is already happening, I think, is unlikely, to say the least. I have great fear about federal and state funding cuts under the Braun administration, under Trump, and the Republican-dominated Congress. I think we're likely to see huge cuts in Bloomington Transit. It makes up from $7 to $12 million of their federal funding per year. They get about $2.6 million from state, and they get $3.8 million from our lit, which is going to go away. So people rely on Bloomington Transit who don't have cars, who need to get to their work, need to get to school, and are low-income people. So it disproportionately affects them. So I think we need to think about how we're going to anticipate that that is likely to happen and what to do about it. Certainly, capital projects will be canceled. They didn't get their federal grant for their $35 million request for the new facility. I think they still need to pay on their $12 million purchase for the land for their new facility. I don't know if this is ever going to happen, but in any case, we need to keep them operationally solvent. Even if they double fares, it would only yield about $400,000 a year. So that's not going to work very well. So it could result in service reduction, which would be terrible, I think, for the community. So I'm going to be really focused on making sure that that essential service is covered to what extent we can. The other one, I would argue, is the hand budget, because what I suggested by doubling hand just puts us on parity with what we used to get in block grants from CDBG about 10 or 15 years ago. So it's not a big ask. It's just that the federal government, under every administration, has been giving us less money for CDBG block grants. And frankly, I could be convinced to house it wherever, just so long as the needs are met, I think are important. Because again, that's the community that's going to be affected most by the state and federal administrations, are those that are most vulnerable in our community. And so thank you.
Thank you. Do other council members have final comments for this evening? Councilmember Rosenberger.
Here I am eating my microphone, as Councilmember Zulik says to do. Thanks so much for commenting, and I'm so sorry that happened to you. I recently went to a Jeff Speck talk, and I've talked about it up here in Louisville, Kentucky. They're redoing a bunch of their one-ways into safer streets, and something he talks about is that it's a lot about speeds, and that a lot of times, slower speeds increase safety so much and are at such a low cost because it's about changing. One thing is about changing speed limit signs, but in a city, the hard part is, like when you're on a highway, what you look at to read the cues is just speed limit signs. But when you're in a city, you use what's around you and how fast people are going and how wide streets are and everything like that instead to kind of gauge your own speed. How a council member said the speed limit on Walnut is 20, but nobody goes 20. People go 30 to 40. And so there's so much that we can do about adding trees, right? And bump outs and parking, on-street parking, all those things to get drivers to drive slower, because it is so important. Because if you're hit at 40 miles an hour, you're probably dying. And if you're hit at 10 miles an hour, you're most likely living. And it's just such an important change, I think, that we can make here so that doesn't happen anymore. And I'm happy that we are committed to safe streets for all and zero fatalities and serious injuries. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any other last comments by council members this evening? Okay, I'm just going to take a minute then to kind of respond to something that Councilmember Rallo said, and also Councilmember Rosenberger kind of referred to, was high speeds and enforcement of high speeds. And I learned something recently. I don't know if other people know it, but I'm going to share it. That when an officer, I was talking to somebody in dispatch, when an officer pulls somebody over, the first thing they do is call dispatch. So not enforcing speed limits or not pulling people over for traffic stops or routine traffic stops isn't just about officers and how many officers we have on the street. It's also dispatch, and whether dispatch, because they're going to prioritize a call from an officer to make sure that our public safety officers are safe. And then if there's not enough dispatchers, then what calls might they not be able to take, and how are they going to balance that time? And I think that was a piece of something that never occurred to me in terms of enforcement of speeds and understanding that dispatch is also a piece of that puzzle. So we need to make sure that dispatch is also fully funded and dispatch is also fully staffed, and that is also something that is not currently happening. In terms of, and dispatch also, dispatchers work a lot of overtime hours, because that is another place where, just like we have to have police officers on streets, we have to have people in dispatch, even if that means they're working overtime. So that's just another piece of our public safety puzzle that I wanted to make sure to point out as being really important. So if there's no other final comments, my note on council schedule right now is that next Wednesday on the 7th, we do have a regular session. And I don't think there's anything else coming up that I want to highlight. Councilmember Piedmont Smith?
We do have a Committee on Council Processes meeting at 12:15 on Monday. I believe it's in the Allison Conference Room.
Wonderful. Any other committee meetings anybody wants to highlight? Thank you very much. This has been a long 3 hours maybe, but I think that it was important and productive. So thank you. Meeting adjourned.